side by side. And so I just want to, I can't express how much I appreciate Dave's partnership, and we wanted to provide an update on DCYF.
Good morning. Thanks, Nicholas, for that. And again, Johnny, you see a lot of heartfelt thanks in the chat, and I, among all of that heartfelt support and encouragement and just recognition, thank you again for being a voice for POC and coming and sharing your story with us. And I'm really looking forward to learning and hearing more about what you've got going on this afternoon. So glad that there's going to be some follow-up. And Jack, I know you were on right after me. I actually don't need to take up a lot of time, so I want to make sure that you know that I see you too. And I know time is fluid, but I want to be able to give space to where I personally believe the space should land for this morning. So Nicholas, I could not have done the work that I've been doing at DCYF without the key partnership with CCYJ. CCYJ has been such a backbone of how we've been able to develop this work at the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, particularly in child welfare and juvenile rehabilitation. It has not only given us a platform to bring this work to light, but it has given us a platform to expand and develop partnerships. It has opened up the places where we have not gone yet. So thinking particularly of early learning, some of our administrative folks too, like how does our LGBTQ work show up for our staff that don't provide direct service? How does that show up in our PBC contracts and things like that? So I just am popping in here to tell you all a little bit about what we're doing at DCYF. Quickly, I didn't introduce myself, I just started talking. So Dave Shugren, I use she, they pronouns. I am the LGBTQ+ disproportionality commercially sexually exploited children's statewide program manager. So just as Johnny was talking about intersectionality, we know that these are not one frame topics and that they intersect and overlap in a myriad of different ways. I've been in this position for about 2.5 years, and I'm also part of the racial equity and social justice team, who is leading the racial equity work inside DCYF, as well as the LGBTQ+, and working towards addressing other marginalizations such as disability, immigrant status, non-native English speakers in the work inside DCYF. And like any other system, we have a shit ton of work to do, and we are doing our best to name it and own it and move with partners to get the work done. We are partnered, and don't go back to the slide, but in the slide of equality protocol, we are live in 3 of our offices. So in Spokane, Lakewood, and Walla Walla. So we're around the state that way, which is really exciting. We're also in that's in child welfare programs, and we're also in the King County and Spokane County juvenile courts, which is also really exciting to see where those overlaps are. All of those offices are in different phases in terms of implementing the equality protocol. And what we're finding is that it's not only challenging for staff, but also like, how do we create these affirming spaces for youth to be able to want to share this information with us about their SOGI, about their experience. So again, just really wanting to reflect what Johnny was saying about we cannot guarantee safe spaces just because we slap a sticker up outside, just because we have really cool staff doing this work, just because we say and think that we're nice people to talk to. If we don't create those affirming spaces and those dialogues and that relationship with our young people, whether they're 3 or 13 or their staff at 35, like we're not going to be able to move this work. So just really wanting to acknowledge that as well. Both child welfare and juvenile rehabilitation have really explicit policies on how we're working with our LGBTQ+ identified children and youth. We're working with licensing to be more proactive about how we are, oh my gosh, I totally forgot, screening out families who are not going to be LGBTQ+ supportive. We actually right now have 2 families that are suing us because they are sharing that they're not going to be LGBTQ+ supportive. And Secretary Hunter is very vocal about wanting to, like, that's not okay and that's not going to work, regardless if that child is an infant or a teenager, that we want to support the whole being of a child. And I know I'm saying all of these things, and I also know that we have staff that are struggling with their own values around this, and that we're working not only with training, but we have a good handful of our LGBTQ+ leads on this call right now who are active and doing this work in their communities. And we want to build resources and capacities for folks to be able to have those. What else are we doing? This month, Nicholas, I really, reading the CCYJ statement around pride, I know that many of us are struggling and trying to find not even balance, but the sense of like, is it okay for me to have pride? It's Pride this month. And yet the Black Lives Movement is so powerful. Like, I don't want to take away from any of that. I want to call out to my cutie POC brothers and sisters, we still can be seen, but this other movement is so much larger right now and so necessarily prominent. But this year at DCOIF, we actually got pride flags out to all of our offices, collated and co-located in primary offices. And I think that's a really big deal for a state office to be flying pride flags, even knowing that we have some communities that are actively pushing back on our support of our LGBTQ plus kiddos. Thanks, Lily, for clearing up my acronyms. So we're starting this work. We're doing this work. And some of this work we're also seeing across other state agencies. We're working with DOH and HCA to look, we have a sex and gender identity workshop. So looking at how to incorporate non-binary identifiers in our systems, in our IT systems, in our paperwork, how we're working with staff, from admin and frontline staff to leadership on how to address the needs and recognitions of LGBTQ plus folks. Of course, the LGBTQ Commission that has gone live, working with them on their children, youth, and families subcommittee and trying to get this work out and vocal across the state. There's just so many ways that I think that, that we've been able to partner and become more visible, knowing that our system disproportionately serves LGBTQ plus kiddos, and how can we examine our own system to not continue to harm a system that's intended to help. How at the same time that we're expected to fix things, we're also the problem of things, right? We've also generated that. And how do we even, I don't like to use the word balance, but how do we address both of those needs? And we have to start internal. We have to start disrupting our system. We have to start naming it and standing up against the ways that dominant culture has continued to, well, dominate the ways that we've done things. And I feel really excited, and I feel really pumped and motivated and supported to do some of this great work. And I know a large part of that, again, is really related to so much of the work that's happening with CCYJ. Some of the, we're going to hear from Jen at Coordinated Care this afternoon, like the partnership we have with our medical providers, the partnerships we have with some of the nonprofits that are advocating in the nonprofit communities, and how we build those partnerships. Like, the resources continue to come because people are willing more so now to see each other in a way that's very public. And that will continue to show the kids that we're serving that they are seen, that they are worthy, that they are enough, and we are here for them. They are the reason I get up and show up for work every day. Oof, I'm gonna get emotional. This little guy over here on my couch playing his new PS4 Spider-Man game is the reason I do this work, right? He is taken care of, he is fed and nourished and seen in all of his explorations. I have permission to say that because he loves popping on in my trainings. And I want every child to have his same experience, right? As he develops himself. So I'm seeing things in the chat. I don't know if I missed a question, but if folks have questions, feel free to throw them in there. I want to give up space to Jack as much as I can, but really just wanting to take this opportunity to thank you all for supporting this work and for allowing me to share what we're doing. Again, I know DCOIF is a big-ass state agency that gets a bad rap, but we are doing what we can, and we're always open and wanting to do more. So just holler, and yeah, just holler. Thanks for showing up.
Thank you so much, Day. We do have a question in the chat. This is from Jen. At Saying It Out Loud conference last month, we got a few questions about serving our youth in JRA or child welfare with gender affirming care when bio parents don't agree.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any insight on how DCYF is navigating that to get youth the medical care they want / need? This may be a CCYJ question too.
Also, I can jump in there. Thanks, Jen, for the question. So my continued consult is going to be that we are here to benefit and support the youth in their decision making, that we don't, and sometimes this question comes up even when folks are asking us, well, if the bio parent doesn't use a chosen name or pronouns, what do we do? And we err into support of the child, right? So it is named in our policy that we will continue to support a child accessing services. That is named in policy that we will continue to support a child or a youth in accessing gender affirming resources. And that is that partnership with Apple Health. That is that if they are accessing any of our services, they have the inherent right to access those services with support.
On behalf of CCYJ, thank you, Day. You're just kick-ass amazing. I think it's important to know that CCYJ is submitting an amicus brief on one of those litigation cases as a friend of the court to provide our expertise around the issues around safe and affirming care for kids in foster care placement. So that is forthcoming, and I think it's important in the spirit of transparency to know that we are so supportive of Secretary Hunter's stand and commitment on behalf of foster care youth in providing safe and affirming care. And Nicholas, I don't know if you want to say anything else, but it seemed like an appropriate time to share that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel, for highlighting that. Yeah, the case is called Blaise v. Hunter. If folks are interested, and we are actually finalizing the brief this week. So just as Rachel said, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can talk to you more about that. Mockingbird will also be joining that brief as well.
And I just wanted to echo for folks who are currently working with parents that don't really have a lot of grasp around this. I also highly recommend the Family Acceptance Project as well as PFLAG. Those are online resources that we're happy to send out links to once this convening is over. With that, thank you so much, Day. We're going to move on to the next speaker. I'm very excited about Jack Malmstrom. I met Jack back in, oh gosh, when was it? Like back in like October. And we became quick friends, and they are truly an expert around the Two-Spirit community, and they have a lot of really amazing things to say. I will also say that their tribe is the Akimel, Othem, and Yaqui tribes. I hope I didn't butcher that. I'm sorry, Jack. If I did, we practiced this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, but let Jack share theirs. And here we go.
All right, just bear with us just a moment. Alrighty. Well, hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us and for being here. We're going to ignore that and go right to here. Hi. Okay. Hello. Skutash, Ninak Chugig, Jackie Malmstrom. Hello. My name is Jackie Malmstrom, or Jack Malmstrom, as friends know me. There we go. Hi. And I am from the Akimel Othem tribe, and I am also Yaqui, and I am the director of the Portland Two-Spirit Society, and I am here today to present on Two-Spirit 101. And I'm hoping everyone can hear me when I share my screen. I can't see a lot of things, so hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, great. So we're going to start off, and I hope that this works. It looks like it's working, and we're going to cross our fingers that this is working. We have a video that I'd like to share, and just a heads up, it's very quiet in the beginning, so don't adjust your computer volume just yet. It might, it'll come on. It's a little quiet in the beginning, and then hopefully we'll hear sound, fingers crossed. And just a heads up, I tend to talk very fast. It's just how my culture is, how we all talk. So I am going to be going through this fairly fast. There's a lot of information to get through. We will be able to ask some questions at the end, but just know I understand that I'm doing a very huge information dump on you, and it can be very overwhelming. So no worries if you don't get it the first time. I know that these slides will be available. I'm open to questions and things like that afterwards and beyond. So just kind of sit back, absorb what you can, and yeah. So we'll go ahead and get started with this video, and I hope this works.
Major funding for Ingenuity was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender, it feels like they're all boxes and categories that you have to fit into, and they can't change. When I learned about being two-spirit, it felt more natural to me. It felt like it acknowledged more than the surface of somebody's identity. I feel like it encompasses also a way of carrying yourself in the world.
What was working before colonization is this practice of passing on of, stories that allowed for people to learn about each other, to appreciate each other, and to live in a way that everyone felt like they were safe and belonged.
For me personally, I wasn't, loud and proud. I was very subdued about it. I never really came out until I left to the city. But when I came back, I'm okay with myself. At one point, gay and lesbians were revered in Navajo culture. It's just that the influence of Christianity really skewed that view of homosexuality. It's a sacredness.
Growing up here in the Bay Area, I saw other LGBT kids, and I couldn't relate to them, or like I wanted to, but I didn't know how. But when I started going to Native boarding schools, and I saw Two-Spirits, and I was like, yeah, okay, I get it now. That's where I belong. That's my place. So I started to come out. I didn't know that I could be an athlete. I didn't know I could be an intellectual. I didn't know that I could embrace all the good things that I knew about me. So my confidence level, it started to peak.
Young people who are just exploring who they are, I want you to remember that there are some tribes out there that didn't even call you a specific gender until you decided what that is. I want you to know that you're empowered and that anything that you may go through, you can overcome. You have the strength, and that you're valuable and you belong here.
For more information about Ingenuity and other ITVS programs, visit ITVS at itvs.org.
Okay. So that was a really quick video from a series called Ingenuity, talking about the two-spirit identity from firsthand accounts, and that's just like a very brief overview. And so now I'm going to get into some of the historical context that comes along with this. So starting at the beginning, so Two-Spirit was adopted by Native people in the early 1990s as an umbrella term and an alternative to Western labels. LGBTQ Two-Spirit Native people throughout North America are reviving the Two-Spirit role and its traditions. National and regional Two-Spirit gatherings, societies, powwows, and all of those events are continuing to grow. Two-Spirit organizations have begun to have a presence at local LGBTQ pride parades. Since the beginning of the Two-Spirit movement, scholarship into the traditional identity has increased. So way back in 1990, I think it's kind of disputed, either late 80s or early 90s, there was a group of queer Indigenous folks who used to meet up in Canada and discussing this role and trying to figure out how do we acknowledge this, because the Western terms that are put upon us are not fitting this. And they knew that before colonization, there was roles, there were words, there were things that our people used to describe folks like ourselves, but those were lost, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later in more detail of how that happened. And so as part of a way to reclaim that identity and breathe new life into it, the term Two-Spirit came about. So Two-Spirit, that term comes from a lot of tribes, not all, because Native people are not a monolith, but a majority of tribes, in the way that it's being viewed, is that Two-Spirit is used because some Native cultures view two-spirited people as being blessed with two spirits, both a masculine and a feminine spirit in one body. Most people get one spirit, but you are blessed with two spirits because you are able to bounce between the masculine and feminine and the in-between and be a mediator for that. And so that was seen as a sacred thing to be. And so that's how the term Two-Spirit came to be. Now, granted, again, there are cultures that do not hold this belief, that they don't believe that you can have two spirits in one body, and that's all fair and good. But at that time, the term Two-Spirit was accepted until we find another term. There is no word, so we come up with a word from our own selves and label it as such. And so it's an umbrella term. There is no super specific, you have to be like this to be a two-spirit. The only thing that is set concrete, not even concrete, that is set in stone, that is set in obsidian, molten, the ultimate bedrock, is that two-spirit is a Native identity only. If you are not Native, you cannot be two-spirit. This is not just a sexual orientation or gender identity. This is a cultural role within that individual's specific tribe. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But again, emphasizing, if you are not Native, you cannot be two-spirit. You are not two-spirit. Regardless of how you feel about gender fluidity and all of these things, this is not a role for non-Native people. This is us reclaiming our traditional roles within our communities and our cultures on top of how our communities and cultures viewed identity. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So that's why it's an umbrella term, because that can look so many different ways depending on the individual person. It's a very personal thing that is tied up in everything that makes one's identity. So here we have these two flags. So the flag on top is the original Two-Spirits flag that was created back in the early 90s. And the flag below it is the current version of the Two-Spirit flag that is used today. And there's more talks on wanting to move away from that rainbow flag, using that rainbow flag and creating our own symbolism for what it is that we want to do. So these things are ever changing and evolving as we continue to find the words and gain a more solid ground of what it is we want, how we want to be in this world. Oof, okay, let's see, as we figured it out. Okay, so before colonization, a majority of tribes recognized third or fourth genders. As you saw in the video, there was some tribes where they wouldn't even assign a gender to the child until the child decided how they wanted to present, how they feel, where they feel that they fit in. We had many roles within tribal communities. We were name givers, medicine people, mediators, adoptive parents, storytellers, keeper of oral traditions, warriors, and many, many more. We had very specific roles in our community and how to best serve the community. A lot of the time, mediator came up because it was viewed that we could, again, see in between the masculine and feminine. The Dene or the Navajo have a story in their community about men and women had a fight, and they got in a fight, and they moved to two different islands, two different places, and men and women were separated because they were mad at each other. And and the two spirits that in their language, which I'm going to butcher because I'm very bad at Dene Bizad, but the Natle, which is what they use for two spirit, the Natle, they would get in a canoe and go back and forth. They went back and forth between the men camp and the women's camp and mediated between the two, because that is where they are, is they are in between, and they're able to see both sides and bring that community together in that way. You can't have one side. The world isn't black and white, right? You have all of these beautiful shades of gray because nothing is just one thing or the other. You need that in between to connect everything together. And that is how the Natle, or two spirit folks, were viewed. So in this story, they mediated between the men's camp and the women's camp until finally an agreement was made and everybody came back together. In some tribal cultures, two spirit people were seen as blessed for having both a male and a female spirit. The picture that I have here, this is Wiwa. She's a famous Zuni two spirit person. She was a weaver, a basket maker, very really good in her craft and in making rugs and baskets and things, and did traditional women's roles in her tribe. And when the Europeans came and saw this, they saw it kind of more of as a novelty at that point. But because of that, Wiwa was kind of adopted into white Western society and taken to various events and things, even met the president. And I don't remember which president, but this is probably the early 1900s, and was brought to the White House and met the president. And it wasn't until through a series of events they found out, and I don't like using this language either, but this is what English is limiting. I always say English is a very limiting language. So until they found out that Wiwa was biologically, in their eyes, a male, when they found that out, she was cast out of white Western society and shamed for being who she was. And it's a very sad story, but without Wiwa's influence, we wouldn't have as much information on two-spirit identity as we do. So the data on this is very limited. We are often overlooked in data surveys regarding Native Americans, regarding LGBTQ people. We really don't have a lot of information and data on our population because we are not always recognized. And that is something that a lot of people are working to fix. But even now in 2020, the data is very, very limiting. And what we have left over is piecing together things from journals of colonizers, from personal tales of Wiwa and a couple other two spirits that were well known at the time. Very small things here and there, and then stories from our elders as well, who can remember some things about what it was like. So trying to piece together what we can, taking it with a grain of salt, depending on who is telling the story. It's difficult work, but it's important work. So after colonization came a wave of things. And we're going to go through all this. So starting off with Kill the Indian, Save the Man. So that came with boarding schools. So boarding schools was a part of the Civilization Fund Act of 1819. And the Civilization Fund Act was basically an act passed by the United States Congress in 1819 to encourage white Western societies and other societies providing education to civilize Native people. They believed that while Native people were viewed as savages and primitive, you could theoretically educate them to be somewhat useful, to be manual labor of some sort, and that there was value in that. So the term "kill the Indian, save the man" came into where you need to kill the savage that is in this person until you get him as close to whiteness as you can, and to be a useful member of society but still remain a lower class citizen because they are not a white person. So with the Civilization Act and the civilization process, as they call it, these federal funds were allocated to schools designed to educate Native Americans in the ways of the white man. And the goal, again, was to civilize, quote unquote, big quote fingers here, civilize Native Americans by getting rid of their traditions, customs, and teaching them reading and writing in the missionary schools. So a lot of these schools, as you can see, here we have some Indian children being taught to pray. These schools were run by the Catholic Church and other churches throughout the country. So they were, a lot of it is about getting rid of any culture. So they would take these children from their res, from their homes, often kidnapping them as well, and moving them thousands of miles away to a school. Sometimes it was closer, but kids would try to run away back home. And so eventually they started moving these children farther and farther away from home to make sure that they could not return. And so they taught them English, they taught them to read and write. The boys learned manual labor, the women learned how to do laundry, how to cook, how to sew, things like that. And the point, again, was to make them useful, subservient to the white Western world. Often in these boarding schools, there was a lot of abuse, and we'll get into that a little bit. Another thing that passed that was part of this was the Indian Relocation Act of 1956. So the Indian Relocation Act of 1956 was a law intended to encourage natives to leave their reservations and to assimilate into general population urban areas. So they wanted, not only did they cram them into these reservations, but they wanted to get them even off that land that they didn't want and get them into urban areas again, to spread them out, to separate from culture, as far away from your homelands and from your mother tongue as possible. And so with this, they offered the American dream, which was a lie. They offered to pay moving expenses, provide vacational training, opportunity. They said they have opportunities waiting for you in these big cities. Portland was a relocation city. Minneapolis was a relocation city. Like a lot of the major cities in the U.S. were relocation cities. And so these people would believe that, and that belief still is felt today, where Native young people living on the reservation do not feel like they have any opportunities to either better themselves or help their family that is on the res. They feel like they have to go outside of the res to even make it in this world, to have any value or do anything of value, and to survive, you have to go outside of the res. So that is still very much felt in our communities today, and is horrible. But so they would take these families and give them a per diem and all these things. They promised all the support, right? And move them into these very white cities. So once they were moved, and they accepted these offers, they received some of the benefits once they arrived, but then eventually that support was taken away. And so now you have somebody who is in an unfamiliar area with no family or support to be seen. You are a person of color in a very white city, so you have no support in community there. Folks often lost their jobs, so you are jobless. Sometimes eventually you end up homeless. You're unable to find work. You have, another thing is the huge culture shock that comes with that, from living within your old culture and then being moved into a completely different environment. The culture shock was also a lot. And so this also leads into some of the effects of historical trauma that we're dealing with. Moving on to forced conversion and religious indoctrination. So again, these boarding schools were run by the churches with federal money, and placing children in boarding schools or mission schools was what you did. And in those schools, punishments for practicing Native traditions or speaking Native languages was you would be severely beaten. There are so many, to the point that we do not know how many, but there are tons of child graves in these boarding schools today. We are still unearthing the bodies of these children that were murdered in these schools. And often the families were told the child ran away, the child got sick. anything but what actually happened. Part of forced conversion and religious indoctrination that ties into this as well is one of the tactics that was used when the church would come up. So all the churches would come to the reservation, they would set up their own branch of the church on the reservation. The Mormons came, Catholics came, Christians came, everybody came. So they set up a church, and it was this game of, oh, you would like food? You would like water? You need these resources? We can give that to you out of the goodness of our hearts. However, you have to join our church. You have to read the Bible. As long as you are a member, we can continue to give this service and the support. But if you don't want that, then we can't help you. And that was part of the game that was being played and is continued to be played to this day on reservations across this nation. Early on in colonization, one of the tactics was that they would observe who was being the most respected. Not just chiefs or that kind of leadership, but they would identify the medicine people. They would identify the two-spirit people. And basically we're given this choice of either convert, or if you don't, convert and tell everybody that this is the way now. This is the right way, because you have influence in your community and we want to use that influence. So either you're with us and you convert and you help us convert the rest of your tribe, or you say no, and instead we'll kill you and we will make an example of you to your people so they know that this is what happens when you tell us no. And both happened. A lot of the time, two-spirited folks were murdered because with colonization, with the way the Western world was and is, with Christianity came the gender binary. There's only male and female, nothing in between. So one of the early words for two-spirited people was birdash, which is actually a slur, a very, very dated and horrible term. I think the origin is French, if I remember correctly, and it roughly translates to like male, young boy, male prostitute kind of thing, because that is the lens that they were viewing this as. They didn't understand, and they couldn't understand at the time, who these people were, how this all worked, and they didn't bother to understand. They saw it as something unnatural and disgusting that must be snuffed out. And so with targeting medicine people, targeting two-spirited folks, and holding them as examples in ways of what happens when you say no, we were used in that way. And any sense of identity that came with that once the tribes converted, you were told that is not correct. There is a male and female, that is it. And many tribes had to adopt that as part of the erasure of their culture. The effects of historical trauma. So I always say this, homophobia is a learned behavior. Homophobia is a colonized behavior. I refuse to listen to anybody who's trying to tell me that there was ever a tribe that exhibited homophobia. No. This is very much a learned behavior and a colonized behavior that has infected our communities, unfortunately, because of these effects of historical trauma, because folks who are trying to be themselves are told that it is wrong and beaten, have it beaten into them. These boarding schools had rampant physical abuse, sexual abuse. There are so many different testimonies. So the boarding schools not only happened in America, they happened in Australia, they happened in Canada. This went on until about, I would say, the mid-1980s. There is still one boarding school open, and it's right here in Oregon, where I am. Jamawa Indian Boarding School is still running and functioning. However, it has been taken over by the Native community, but there is still a lot of problems with it. But most of them closed in around the 80s or so. So we're talking 1819 to like 1983, 1984, maybe even a little bit longer into the 90s, that this system was in place. Children were taken when they were so young and only taught English and then put back on the res when they were adults, or they would come back to the res to see family, and they couldn't communicate with mom and dad. Mom and dad speak the tribe language. Mom and dad don't speak English, but you only speak English. That's part of the isolation that comes into the effects of historical trauma, which causes substance abuse. There is no way to cope. It is so alone when you can't even communicate with the people who look like you, with people you came from. You're not wanted on the res because you can't communicate and you can't relate to anything that you you see here anymore. You have no connection to that. If you go back to where you came from the people who taught you, you're still ostracized because you're an Indian. You're not white. You are still dealing with the effects of racism and oppression on that end. There is no safe space for that. There is no place to be yourself. You cannot connect, and that is so isolating. And it was designed that way. All of these systems, even though the Civilization Fund Act sounds nice in theory, all of these systems were put in place to eliminate Native people, period. Everything, all of these systems in place were there to eliminate people of color and the original inhabitants of this land. It is designed specifically that way, even to this day. Those are the roots of the systems that we work in child welfare, in the US government. I don't care what kind of system. Those are the roots of this, is white supremacy, and we need to be mindful of that. So with that also comes internalized oppression. You are told you're a dirty Indian. Anything that is related to your culture, that's ungodly, that's not right, that's dirty, you shouldn't do that. So you're taught that that is bad. And so now you hate yourself of like, oh my goodness, my parents make this disgusting food. We see it all the time, right? My parents, we see it with immigrant families as well, of just like being ashamed of who you are, being ashamed of your culture. And so therefore, sometimes it's internal oppression, sometimes it's lateral oppression of, well, you're too Indian, you need to act white. If you dressed better, if you weren't so resi, then you'd be respectable. If you actually took time to look nice, wear suits, you got to play the white man's game. You got to go to college, you got to sound nice, you got to speak English well, speak English good, which is not the case. And again, it's a colonized thing that we are taught. And unfortunately with this, historical trauma turns into intergenerational trauma, because there are still people who have gone to boarding school. This is, again, not in the past. My grandparents went to boarding school. My great-grandma went to boarding school. Like, my grandmas are still alive and they went to boarding school. My mom's generation could have gone to boarding school and she did not for various reasons, but I know many people who are my mom's age who went to boarding school. Like, this is a thing that is still affecting our communities, and the things that they learned in boarding school still affect them because those traumas are passed down to us. We're learned. They don't know how to process any of it because there was no supports. So that trauma gets passed down from one generation to the next, whether they went to boarding school or not. These are things that we are taught and passed down. So domestic abuse as well rises with that because it's part of the effects of historical trauma that we are currently dealing with in being taught these ways that are not our own, and it all kind of ties into that. So it's a lot of things that are plaguing our community. You can all bring it back to, it all started when Columbus set foot on our land, kind of thing. So there's a lot here with that. So after colonization, a lot went down and a lot of culture was erased on purpose. Oof, okay, okay. So risks. So 20 to 40% of all homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. 85% of the 400 homeless LGBTQ youth reported having been in the child welfare placement at some point in the past. 63.5% of LGBTQ students were reported feeling unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation, while 43.9% felt unsafe because of their gender expression. This is from Lambda Legal back in 2015. So we are still dealing with this today. LGBTQ folks are still very highly represented, as well as youth of color are also very highly represented in the child welfare system. And a large amount of that is due to family rejection, is due to bias within these systems that are built to help them. There are many different ways that this can happen, but overall, this is an overwhelming amount of folks that are ending up in these systems and are not being served. And this is one of the bigger risks that LGBTQ folks have. You come out to your parents and they say, get out, you are kicked out. So what do? Do you enter the child welfare system, where that can be a whole ride on its own, and you don't know where you're going to end up, and you're unsure of, can I trust all of these adults? Or you become homeless and you try and survive out on your own, either crashing on couches or living in the street, which leads to other ways of survival that may not be healthy, but you have to do what you have to do because you can't go home. You don't have anywhere else to go, and you're just trying to be yourself. And then, or the third option would be to stay closeted and live a life of hell, of just not being yourself, which also leads to the suicide rates that we see in LGBTQ folks, including in my own, communities. Native communities have seen a huge rise to the point where tribes are calling state of emergencies because youth are committing suicide at extremely higher rates, and a lot of those youth usually end up being LGBTQ youth. Continuing the risk. So in the first ever study at the rates of violence and the outcomes against lesbian, bisexual, and two-spirit American Indian and Alaskan Native women found that 85% have experienced sexual assault, and 78% were survivors of physical assault. Of these survivors, 70% reported being sexually assaulted by someone they knew, 63% by a stranger, and 53% by both. 38% of these relatives have experienced both sexual and physical assault by strangers and people they knew. Abuse often began in childhood, with 76% reporting they were 18 or younger when assaulted by someone 5 years or older. The author cited another alarming statistic, finding out that 1/3 of two-spirit men in Canada have been gay bashed. In the US, 45% of gay, bisexual, and two-spirit men reported sexual or physical assault by someone other than their partner, versus only 2% of straight and cis Native men. In a study by National Gay and Lesbian Task Force in 2011, 46% of two-spirit people reported being rejected by family, and 45% suffered family violence. Homelessness is a common issue for Native transgender people, as well as experiencing discrimination in shelters. 55% reported being harassed by shelter staff, 29% were turned away, and 22% were sexually assaulted by residents or staff. This is a continuing thing. These systems that we're supposed to turn to and trust are still heavily being affected by the bias and by hate. We can try and go to a shelter, but we risk assault. We can try and turn to the child welfare system, but we might be placed in a home that is not accepting. We might have a caseworker who has their own biases and doesn't respect that person's identity. There are so many places that we turn where we can easily be let down. Violence is a huge thing. Even in our Native communities, even on the reservations, there's a very famous documentary called Two-Spirit, which is about a Two-Spirit person who was on the Navajo reservation who was murdered just for being who they were. Two-Spirit folks are still being murdered for being who they are, even in Indian reservations. Even in Native reservations, that is a huge thing. Family rejection is still a big problem. I always say, like, it's not a new topic, but in a way it is still a new topic for our Native communities that are just now starting to try and get a grasp of what this is and what this means in their community. Again, it's a relearning and undoing that historical trauma and acknowledging that historical trauma that has happened to our communities that has caused us to be ignorant to who we have in our community. Oftentimes, a lot of these folks have to meet in private or in secret even though, we have societies that are out and about. It really, really depends. If you're in the Crow Nation, Crow Nation has all these billboards, Jesus Christ is Lord, on the Crow Reservation. It is not safe to be queer on the Crow Reservation, as opposed to Navajo Nation has just made huge strides, even though they have, they just had Dene Pride. Dene Pride has been going on for about, I think, 3 years. That's their first ever Pride event. However, they still have their version of the Defense of Marriage Act. The Navajo, or the Dene Marriage Act is what it's called, the Dene Marriage Act. And that defines marriage on the Navajo Nation as between a man and a woman only. And they still have that to this day. And they're still fighting for that, yet they can still have a Navajo nationwide pride. And that's kind of where we're at right now. We're straddling between that and slowly making progress, for sure. Gay marriage has been, declared and accepted by multiple Indian communities across Turtle Island and written into law in many places, which is great, but we still have a very long way to go because of that. So family acceptance. So this is from the Family Acceptance Project. I really, really love these people a lot. They have so many amazing resources. I can't even begin to go on with all the resources, but I highly recommend Family Acceptance Project. So with Family Acceptance, this is from them from 2009. Youth who believe they can be a happy LGBT adult based on the level of family acceptance. So when the family is extremely accepting, 92% believe they could be a happy adult in the future. When they're very accepting, 77%, a little accepting, 59%, and not at all accepting, 35%. So depending on the level of who accepts them, family is a huge part of that. But when you're rejected by your family, by your community, by those closest to you, the future looks bleak. You feel like you have no future. You do not believe you can be a happy adult moving forward if you don't have your loved ones to support you. And as you can see, the more accepting they are, the more hopeful for the future they can be, because they know that they can be open and be who they are and live a life, a healthy life as an LGBTQ adult and being out and open. So family acceptance is huge of course, just with self-worth, and it's something that we really try to strive for, because a lot of the time with the family acceptance, it really can come down to, sometimes it can really just boil down to ignorance, and it can be scary. The parents aren't as well versed in this, and the first reaction sometimes that people have when they're scared or caught off guard is anger, is to be fight or flight about it. And so that is why things like the Family Acceptance Project, and we have various education tools that we can use to try and talk with the family and really break it down for them. My parents were very accepting. I never had to come out to my parents. I was adopted out. I was raised by white folks, but both my birth family and my adoptive family accept me for who I am. My brother, on the other hand, who was also adopted, we're not blood related, but he's my brother. And he came out as gay, and he was terrified. He felt like he needed to come out, and he was so scared that my parents were going to reject him. And they didn't, of course, like it wasn't a big thing. But when my brother came out, my mom called me, and her main concern was, what if he gets gay bashed? Like now my child is in danger for being who he is. And those were valid concerns. And those are real things. So sometimes it even is just out of fear of, oh no, now my child is at an even higher risk. Now I recognize that my child may be in danger if they try to do this. They try to be who they are. And that sense of protection can kick in. Again, kind of a fight or flight response. And so again, this is why education, and I took time, and I used to be my mom's kind of gay dictionary for a while early on, and just take time in education. And sometimes it can really make a big difference once they have a better understanding. So many parents feel conflicted when they learn that their child is LGBTQ. They are unsure how to react. They may feel disappointed, concerned, or don't know how to help their LGBT child. They may respond cautiously since they don't want to encourage the identity, but they also don't want to push their child away. It's a conflicting thing from what they've been taught and their own biases versus their love for their child. And it's a difficult thing to navigate, but it's definitely something that can be navigated with patience and education. Not always, but sometimes, and it's worth trying. So youth have the right, so youth in the system when it comes to child welfare, youth have the right to confidentiality. Agencies should not disclose information regarding their sexual orientation or gender identity without the youth's permission or in case of emergency. Youth can request that a new caseworker be assigned if the current worker is not addressing their needs appropriately. Support in expressing their gender identity. They have a right to that. Child welfare agencies should respect their, it says preferred pronouns, but it should be just their pronouns. It's not preferred, it's this is who they are. And you should respect that, their pronouns and the names that they use. The importance of an appropriate service plan. This should include the same permanency planning services provided to heterosexual or gender-conforming youth. A youth's sexual orientation or gender identity alone should not be a reason for a worker to forego attempts to reunite the youth with their birth family or seek a permanent adoptive placement. This also includes helping the youth access LGBTQ community programs if desired. This is why it's important to find homes that accept LGBTQ youth. But this is also why it's important to do work like what the Family Acceptance Project does, and do work in at least attempting to educate the birth family in the beginning to see if there is some reconciliation there. Again, it is not always guaranteed, and sometimes that does not always happen the way we would like it to. But an effort does need to be made to try and do that. It's very important. These children have been through so much, and it's so hard for me to even say children. Like these youth, these people have been through so much by the time they get to you in the welfare system. Things that sometimes even us as adults will never understand or experience. Sometimes they have beyond adult experiences at a very young age. They've had to grow up extremely fast and to not acknowledge that and to not recognize that is a disservice to who you are meant to serve, to who are you, to your job, to your interaction with this person as another person, and to recognize that. You need to recognize that what they've been through and their experiences are so valid. Nobody is an expert in what this person needs more than themselves. I don't care if they're 13, I don't care if they're 10, 16, whatever. They have that expertise, and you need to tap into that and listen to what it is their needs are. I've heard so many caseworkers say, there are some things that you as a 16-year-old or as a 15-year-old don't really need to know, don't really need to concern yourself with. They have every right to concern themselves with it because it's their future. Hands down. They should have a say in their future. Absolutely. Because when you don't listen to them, you are not helping them, you're not serving them, you're not doing your job, you're not placing them in a good environment. I've also heard from LGBTQ foster youth saying, I do not feel safe in where I'm at. I am not accepted as who I am, but there's no other placements, or there's this or that. There's all these excuses, but part of this is also being open and honest about that. Being quite candid. You'll be surprised with how easy it is and how much they really do understand. It's not up to you to say, well, they're not going to understand this. Try. There are ways to make it age appropriate. You have to be open and honest to build that trust. If someone, we all have bullshit meters. And I know if you can think back when you were that age and an adult lied to you, or an adult wasn't telling you the truth, I'm willing to bet money everybody listening to me right now has had a moment like that. And every time when an adult tells you a half truth, or you know an adult is lying to you, your bullshit meter went off. And what was your level of trust with that adult afterwards? Not so great, right? You need to have those open lines of communication in order to serve them better overall. Because now, if they can't trust you, what are they really wanting to tell you? And you might not be getting all the information that you need. You might not know that they aren't being accepted back at home because they don't trust you in telling that. You might not know about various things that are going on that you need to know. So part of that is respecting this person and being open and honest with them and being blunt with them and filling them in, walking them through the process. No one takes time to let youth know what their rights are under this. Take that time. I know these systems are complicated. I know there's a lot of legalese and jargon and all kinds of things. The more informed they are of what they can do and how the system works and what influences your decisions, the more understanding they have of these systems, the better, so they can navigate it to serve and to do what it is that needs to be done and what they need from it. You need to, I hate the word empowering because it implies that they don't have power in the first place. We all have power and we all deserve it. But again, English is limiting. This is how you can empower the youth, is letting them know and walking them through the processes. Pulling back the curtain, because they deserve to know how these work. They deserve to know where along the line this service, these systems are failing or not failing. But that is a better way that they can be informed. So with child welfare, LGBTQ youth, again, are at significantly higher risk of harassment and violence than their peers. If seeking a foster or adoptive home placement, be sure the home is accepting of LGBTQ people. Trust the instincts and observations of your LGBTQ youth when it comes to feeling safe and welcome. Respond promptly to anti-LGBTQ slurs and attacks, and be prepared to be an advocate for fair and equal treatment of your LGBTQ youth, not just when you're in front of them. Overall, you gotta walk your walk, talk your talk, all of that stuff. You can't just do it while it's in front of them. You need to make this part of your life. This is so important. Beyond just your work, just overall for the betterment of human society. Stand up to when you see that. When you see racism, when you see homophobia, stand up to that. Speak out against it. It's important. Offer counseling for LGBTQ youth and questioning youth that is confidential, non-judgmental, and supportive. Offer counseling and resources to birth families to overcome any homophobia and develop their sensitivity to LGBTQ issues. Again, it's worth it to at least try and untangle the feelings that may occur when a child comes out, when a person comes out. Provide resources and community contacts for caseworkers, foster parents, birth families, and LGBTQ youth, including support and peer groups, reading lists, materials, hotlines. Get yourself familiar with what's out there. There's so many resources out there. A lot of people say, you know, Ignorance isn't really an excuse, especially in this day and age. You have Google, and Google is so powerful. It really is a quick search away. There are so many resources out there, and becoming familiar with that and sharing that, spreading that far and wide, not just with the youth on your caseload, but with your coworkers, with your family, with whoever, some dude you meet on the street. Share it. It's so important. But especially with this, again, talking about isolation that can come with trying to be who you are, you want to move away from isolation. So, you know, helping them understand and showing them resources where they know that they are not alone, even if the family rejects them, knowing that there's a safe place they can go where they can make friends, or even just meeting people like themselves is so huge. I didn't meet any Native adoptees until I was 24. And it changed my life. And it's what got me into this work in the first place. It was so huge to meet people who were like me. I met other adoptees, but they were white, they were African American, they were Black. You know, I met other adoptee people, but they weren't Native adoptees. And then I was in a room with 20 Native adoptees, all sharing our stories, and it changed my life. Being in that community, having that community, building that community of folks who are like you and have had similar experiences is so huge, as we all know. So coming out, so part of that, coming out is never a single action. I just came out to y'all as Two-Spirit. I am consistent. It's a process of coming to terms with being LGBTQ and sharing one's identity with others that you trust. This process happens many times over the course of a lifetime. Anytime I meet someone new, I will be coming out to them. I will always be coming out, no matter wherever you're at in society. I will always be coming out to people. Many factors can affect the coming out process. There are many reasons why someone might not be out in some, or might be out in some places, but choose to stay closeted in other places. Sharing information about someone's LGBTQ identity without their permission is sometimes referred to as outing, and this can be very harmful and should be avoided. Always check with the youth on what they are comfortable with. This is a safety issue. Not only is it a risk to their safety, but it's also a huge violation of trust. When they come out, if you have a youth coming out to you, that's so huge. They feel so safe being with you that they feel like that they can trust you with this information. I am trusting y'all with the information because there are people out there, and we all know this already. There are people out there who want me dead, who want these youth dead, who want anybody like us dead. And they have proven that they are willing to act on that, act on those feelings, even now. There are people who want me dead because I'm Native. There are people who want me dead because I'm Two-Spirit. That is a reality. And I take that risk every day when I come out to new people, because who knows if I come out to somebody who has that belief. Maybe they're willing to act on it, maybe not. We don't know. That is a safety risk. And again, a huge violation of trust. So please be mindful of that. Setting the example. What's your pronouns? So, I apologize, I forgot to tell my pronouns. My pronouns are they, she, or he. For those who are familiar with Pokemon, I always like to say I'm a gender ditto. I am a gender blob that morphs interchangeably between everything and anything. So I'm fine with they, she, or he. However I come off to you in the moment is fine. You could call me he one day, call me she the next. That's how I identify. I use Two-Spirit as a gender identity and sexual orientation, because that is what fits me best. So what's your pronouns? You can't know what people's pronouns are just by looking at them. And it's better to ask instead of assume, as we know. When you assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. Gender neutral pronouns such as they, them, theirs, and others are grammatically correct and valid. Pronouns may shift or change as someone learns more about their own identity and themselves, so be patient with that. Something I like to use is if I am unsure of what pronouns a person uses and they are not present for me to ask, I use they, them pronouns just in case, because I don't want to try and assume, but they, them pronouns are also just a good way of like, I am not familiar with their pronouns. And then once I am informed of their pronouns, then I can use them. But at least they, them is like at least a somewhat neutral way of me addressing them without trying to assume what they prefer. So asking youth what the pronouns are and consistently using them. Be a resource. Again, get educated on what resources are available and become familiar with that. It's possible some youth will be learning about this for the first time, so make sure it's a good learning opportunity for them. This may be their first time really actually looking into this. They may come from a very sheltered home life and don't know where to go first. Make it a good, positive experience for them. This is huge. Correct homophobic behavior you see, not just in front of queer people, everywhere. Use inclusive language again. Some folks try to move away from saying, hey guys, or things like that. Say, hey folks. Instead, more gender neutral terms. Be conscious of your biases. We all have biases, and I get that. We all were raised with certain beliefs and things, and we all have our way of seeing the world. And it's important to be aware of that. And also just remember, and this is something I always say as well, it's not about you. This isn't about you. You cannot you cannot center yourself in someone else's story. However you feel about me and the way I live my life doesn't matter. It shouldn't have to affect me in any way. This isn't about you. This is about them and what is best for them. Not what you believe is best for them, but what is best for them based on their experiences and what they need. So be mindful of your biases and question some things. Get flexible with it. You got so much information. Just nothing's ever set in stone. The world isn't always how you see it. And it's important. It's so beautiful to see other perspectives like that. So get educated. Support youth who come out to you, of course. Research and educate. And so this is like a symbol here. We've all seen this before, I'm sure. It's a safe zone that we have. Teachers and other teachers, social workers, all kinds of different offices can have this, letting know that you are safe here, no matter your sexual orientation, gender expression, or gender identity. So having symbols like this help, making it more visible that, yeah, like this is a safe space. But it's not just having the little badge of honor. It's not just having your little safety pin or your little ally thing. No, this is the bare minimum here. You need to show it in your actions. Actions speak louder than words. But this is also a good start of showing little things here and there where they're like, okay, before you even get to talking to them, this at least lets them know something's in the works. Connect with local Two-Spirit societies and Native communities in your area. There is no excuse. Most tribes have a website now. It's very easy to get in contact with tribes. I used to do it for a living. It's very easy to get in contact with tribes. Reach out to your local tribes. Trust me, there are plenty of Indians in your area. Look for community centers. Look for, again, whatever Native tribes are surrounding your area. Reach out, build those connections with those tribes in the Two-Spirit societies in your area. Find online communities. As we know with this coronavirus stuff, online community is huge and it's very, very useful. So make use of it. There's plenty of youth groups that are going on right now. There's ones for adults. Like there's so many things available online. Attend cultural events. Go to powwows. Go to Pride. Take the kids. Like there's so many also cultural events that you can introduce them to as well and kind of walk them through it. Again, it depends on their individual tribe, and take time to know what individual tribe they are and understand that if they're not enrolled, that doesn't make them any less Indian. I'm not enrolled. That doesn't make me any less Akimalotham or Yaqui. I don't need the foreign government to tell me who I am. A piece of paper does not change my race. Encourage inclusion. Encourage cultural training in this. Learn about us, not just from Dances with Wolves. Like really get educated about the cultures that surround you and the land that you're on. So this is a good way of showing stuff. This is from the Hero Project to Cherokee Nation. They have this little LGBTQ bulletin board that has all of these terms: questioning, LGBTQ, ally, gay. This is just one way of showing like just the symbols in your waiting room, in your office, wherever you are, in your classrooms. This is one way to show the support and also continue the education. So you see these little things here: LGBTQ, questioning, ally, gay, bisexual. Well, you flip it up and there's a little QR code that you can scan with your phone that takes you to a page that provides a definition for this and goes into further detail. It's really, really cute. If folks are interested in getting those instructions for that, there's a lot available on the internet. There's many different versions of this, but I can also, reach out to Lily and I can get that to you. Here's some other ways. These are some flyers from Native programs. Healthy Native Youth Sexual Health Network is fantastic. Healthy Sexuality and Fighting Homophobia, Native Youth Photography Project, pictures of Two-Spirited youth. This is from Northwest Area Indian Health Board, Two-Spirit Loved and Accepted. We need you here for Two-Spirit suicide prevention. things like these, this is huge too. Representation matters. Seeing folks like us matter, and doing things like this, showing these kind of flyers and things, having these in your office again is just so huge to see. Remember, issues related to oppression are everyone's concern, not just the concern of those who are the targets of oppression. Making mistakes is part of learning and process of the learning process. Acknowledge and apologize for your mistakes, but make sure you learn from them. I wish I could remember the specific who that came from, but a lot of what I'm hearing right now, considering everything with Black Lives Matter and where we're at right now in talking about white supremacy, I'm no longer accepting apologies. I'm only accepting changed behavior. Change behavior is the best way to correct those mistakes, and continuously learning about that. Feeling uncomfortable is a necessary part of unlearning oppressive behaviors. Don't forget, humor is good medicine. We gotta have a good sense of humor, even if it's gallows humor at this point, but memes and different things, there are so many different ways to reach out and to connect with folks. I love this meme. It is a great meme. But find humor, laughing with each other. This is all very serious and very heavy, I know, but at the same time, one of the ways that we can connect is just by laughing, just breaking the tension, and humor is always good. So having a good sense of humor, being flexible with things, and it kind of helps ease you and just get comfortable with it. These are a lot of heavy things to absorb, but at the end of the day, we take it with humility, and don't forget to laugh. For those who might not be able to see the blurry text, it says, when you invite the creature from the Black Lagoon to the powwow and he busts a move during intertribal. If you've been to a powwow, you get that joke. If you haven't, that's fine. Intertribal is just when everyone goes out and dances, and creature is cutting the rug right here. So here's some resources real quick before I take up too much time. And feel free to screenshot these. These are Native specific and not Native specific. So we have Family Acceptance Project. I have various toolkits here. Native PFLAG is a thing. There is a Native American chapter of PFLAG in Albuquerque. It's either in Albuquerque or Phoenix. Oh no, I think it's Phoenix, Arizona. I have some YouTube videos that you can search that also discuss Two-Spirit identity and what that means. So, and this will all be available, but I just wanted to share some of these resources. The Los Angeles LGBT Center has a lot of really good toolkits and resources. Lambda Legal, Getting Down to Basics. This is one I quoted within this presentation. It's a fantastic tool for LGBTQ youth in foster care. National Center for Child Welfare Excellence is also a lot of really good toolkits and resources. So here's some hotlines as well that you can use and give to your whoever you serve, or just have on hand. They're very good things to have. And with that, Sapa, thank you so much. I hope I didn't take up too much time, but thank you for listening and absorbing my fast talking. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie, so much. I really appreciate that, and especially appreciate the concrete action steps and concrete resources. I'm definitely going to reach out to Native PFLAG. I was not aware of that, so that is great to know. Yeah. How do we clap again? Reactions. Here we go. So we are going to take a break until 1:10. Is that right, Lily?
Actually, we were going to do some questions. There were some
questions.
We are?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. So there was a question that we have. This is from Jen. I learned in an Indigenous-led training on Two-Spirit people a few years ago that some tribes learn to hide their Two-Spirit people to protect them specifically from the Catholic Christian Church. And that led to the erasure of Two-Spirit people in some cultures. Is this accurate, or do I need to do some better learning?
It's definitely possible. I think a lot of it is just ensuring that those folks remain closeted. Part of it too, when it comes to Christianity and Indigenous culture, and I know this personally myself because this is how my tribe is, and it's a difficult thing to kind of undo. A lot of ways that Native people got creative in order to make sure that their culture survived is they integrated their culture with Christianity. So I'm from Pascua Yaqui tribe. Pascua is not a Yaqui word. Pascua is Easter. Pascua is from Spain because we fought Spain colonizers on top of white people. And so Pascua Yaqui is a very Catholic tribe. And that is how our culture survived, was we took our traditional ways, but then we integrate it with Catholicism to the point now where it's very hard to undo that. I mean, a lot of people are having struggles even wanting to, but we've repurposed our deer dance to represent the resurrection of Christ, for example, things like that. And so that is some ways that Native folks, you can also see it in Mexico, Dia de los Muertos and things like that, like things that seem to kind of be more in the church. And of course, in American culture, right? Like Christmas is a pagan holiday. Christmas is Yule, Halloween. Like we've managed to kind of do that and adapt in that way. But unfortunately, that survival instinct has stuck so long in so many generations that it seems like the new normal. So yeah, it is possible that they hid Two-Spirit people for sure, but I think in that hiding, it's more of those Two-Spirit people were forced into a closet that didn't originally exist. I have Lakota friends who say teepees don't have closets, but white people came and built them for us. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Jack. There's also a comment from Talina saying, also locally in Wa, the Squamish tribe was the first to legalize same-sex marriage, so hooray for the Squamish tribe. Much love to them.
Nice.
A lot of comments on thank you and gratitude. I'm just also making sure I'm not. So Ashley asks, is there a way to protect from cultural appropriation within the larger community? I feel like that's a kind of heavy, a larger question. But.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
I think so. If you have a Native kid, don't buy him a dream catcher right off the bat. My tribe doesn't have dream catchers. I'm Southwestern. We don't do that. I don't eat buffalo. It's just educating yourself and recognizing that we're not a monolith. And so really identifying that person's tribe. And if they're not sure, that's fine. But also maybe turning them to actual Native people to help guide them through that process instead, and recognizing that you as a non-Native person can't, and letting Native people kind of take the wheel in that. But overall, the key is to really recognize and educate yourself about their individual tribes. And there's over like 500 federally recognized tribes on top of state, and that doesn't even count state recognized tribes and all the complications that come with that. It's a very complicated political identity. But having the patience and taking the time to educate yourself about that individual culture, and even then working more with people from that culture, not just trying to assume and taking bits and pieces that you can get off the internet, but actually reaching out to those people and letting them take the reins in that and kind of guide that is probably the best bet.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that answer and distilling that for us. I know, yeah, that's a big question, and I appreciate you answering. So Nicholas, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yeah, so we are going to take a break until 1:10. So please join us. You can simply stay on, I think, right, and just mute or stop your video and just stay on if that's probably the simplest way to do it. That's what we'll be doing, and we'll be joining you again at 1:10 with Jen Estroff of Coordinated Care. Thanks. I'm very happy to introduce Jen Estroff from Coordinated Care. We're excited to bring Jen back. I would bet that the majority of you, if not the vast majority of you, serve or advocate for youth that are covered under coordinated care. And even if not, every time I've listened to Jen, there is relevant information for us all. And so I think that's really important. So I'll let Jen take it from here. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, folks. Can everyone see our screen? Yes, I'm seeing nodding. Perfect. Thank you. And I'd also like to introduce my co-presenter, Scott Swan. And we do have official presenter slides, so you'll have all of our information. I use she, her, and hers pronouns.
I use he, him pronouns.
Okay. And we're very excited to present to you today. So we totally appreciated the tribal land acknowledgement earlier today. And just wanted to point out that it's a step that we've been taking towards equity, led by our manager of tribal relations, JJ McMines, who is Quileute enrolled in Quinault tribe. And this is just a piece that we include in everything now, and love to always see that in everything that we do. We're gonna give this to Scott to describe what this next short section is.
Yes, and so as many people are aware, a lot of the prides are going digital right now. So we got to make our little 15-second pride video. So we wanted to share some of the values we really wanted to make sure that others are aware are core to how we operate and how we run things, and standing in solidarity. So our video, are we gonna play it? We're just gonna go through the slides. So our slides.
Oh, that's right, they're timed. That's my bad.
Yeah, they're timed because it's a 15-second thing.
Yeah.
But it goes through and so is it just going off on its own?
I'm trying to fix it so people can actually see it. We wanted to include all the flags. And I can pause here for a minute and just briefly mention, so Coordinated Care actually has 3 different plans in the state. We have the Apple Health Core Connections plan that runs statewide. And that covers foster care adoption. So a lot of the youth that we work with your organizations, Apple Health Core Connections is the type of plan you see for Medicaid. We also, in various parts of the state, have our Coordinated Care Apple Health or regular Medicaid plan that folks can sign up for. We have a plan in the exchange called Ambetter. And one thing we want everyone to know is that while people are losing coverage for from COVID, COBRA is honestly a pretty wretched option. So if you do know folks who have lost their coverage through other sources, we really encourage folks to get on WA Health Plan Finder and see what they are eligible for. Of course, you can consider Coordinated Care and Ambetter if it's available in your region. And then you know that if you ever have questions, you can call Scott or myself and you'll have our information. So here is our presenter slide with more of our information. And we just made this slightly easy and took a lot of the slides from our presentation at Say It Out Loud. So if any of you were there, this is going to look relatively familiar, but we figured why reinvent the wheel when the information we wanted to share is already compiled. So I am going to start off here with Medicaid covered services. I'm going to do this at a very high level, lightning fast. So, but I will dig down a little bit more into the gender affirming care that is covered. And I actually just sent Day and Nick and Lily, the Office of the Insurance Commissioner, sent out a message today to all Washington state insurers saying, essentially, regardless of what the Trump administration is saying, gender affirming care, trans health care is covered. It has to remain covered in Washington state. So that is a bit of good news. We also want to recognize that just because someone has health coverage does not mean they are accessing health care. Based on finding a provider that you're comfortable talking about your actual needs with, especially for our LGBTQ youth. You know, folks just avoid primary care providers sometimes because they've had a couple bad experiences and they don't want to consistently get misgendered or, you know, considered to be, you know, doing risky, quote unquote, behaviors based solely on their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. So, we know all of you are in roles to help you get connected with actual healthcare and want to thank you right now for that. So integrated managed care. So as of January 1st of this year, in every type of Medicaid plan throughout the state, behavioral health and substance use treatment is now all integrated with physical health treatment. Dental is still carved out. That still goes through Medicaid fee for service. Your vision exams are covered by a managed care plan, but the glasses still go through the state of Washington, interestingly enough, because they use prison labor to make the glasses that are covered under the Healthcare Authority. Feel free to write your own legislator about that. But these benefits, the doctor's offices, urgent care, emergency room prescriptions, the hearing exams and hearing aids, all of these types of things are all covered by the managed care plan. Coordinated care is one, and then in various parts of the state, you might also see United, Molina, AmeriGroup, and Community Health Plan of Washington. Please note that the behavioral health and hormone therapy part, or hormone blockers, are covered through a managed care plan. We'll talk more about that. A little bit more detail on behavioral health benefits, wraparound with intensive service, and given who you all are, I'm sure you're relatively familiar with these. Wraparound with intensive services, or WISE, the program of assertive community treatment, PACT, is essentially the adult version for 21 and up of WISE, helping people get services in community so they don't need to go into inpatient settings. Substance use disorder treatment, including detox, medication-assisted treatment, outpatient and intensive outpatient, all of those are covered through a managed care plan. Crisis services, there's something called the Behavioral Health Administrative Services organization, and those are throughout the state, and they administer the crisis services. I'm guessing most of you are already familiar with the crisis line in your own region. But just reflecting on conversations we've already had about police violence, whenever we're doing this work, we're strongly encouraging folks to contact the crisis line and not police. We actually have several providers whose policy was to contact police for youth that were having escalated behaviors. And that's something that I hope everyone continues to just consider if there's different ways of doing that, like using a crisis service. Provider one benefits, these are the fee for service, the carve outs, we talked about that a bit. That does include transportation for medical appointments, and if there are court connections or a coordinated care member, we can help arrange that transportation. And we just want to make sure folks notice things like maternity support services or pregnancy terminations are covered under those services. And here is some more of the detail of what is covered in Washington State Medicaid. We also feature what's covered in AmBetter, which is one of the plans available through the Affordable Care Act. So the green X's that you see, those are the things that are covered directly through a managed care plan, so that coordinated care covers directly. Hormone replacement therapy, the hormone blockers, mental health services, and preventative services as appropriate. So one thing to note is that we know gender dysphoria is actually becoming less and less of it's becoming less of an appropriate way to refer to someone who is trans or gender non-binary or non-conforming, because as when homosexuality used to be considered a psychiatric disorder, gender dysphoria isn't something that is a mental disorder. It is just a condition of the way we were born, and it's not uncommon. So, but to be able to access gender affirming services through Medicaid, someone does need a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And then we strongly encourage folks who want to pursue gender affirming services or trans health services to get a care manager with their health plan. Then when you move into surgeries and things that are covered by Healthcare Authority directly or fee for service, electrolysis and laser is covered, but it's not covered for facial feminization. And so we know this can create a safety issue, but it's not currently covered for folks who are feminizing. And but top surgery, hysterectomy, oreectomy, so things like bottom surgeries, those are covered. And then a laryngoplasty or tracheal shave and facial feminization service surgery, they are covered, but they're actually considered an exception to rule in the most current billing guide, and I put a link there. So Healthcare Authority will review on a case-by-case basis, but it's not guaranteed that the state will cover that service. So many of these reasons are why we really encourage folks to have a care manager that really gets to know the full picture of what they need, can work closely with a caseworker or with folks at JRA and who's ever interacting with that youth, confidentially, but really making sure that that youth, once they know where they are on their gender journey, really can, if they want to pursue a healthcare journey to go along with that and pursue some gender affirming services, that they're supported all the way through that. And this is something we shared with our team, and we shared at Say It Out Loud with a lot of providers from around the state, that there are absolutely risks of withholding medical treatment for adolescents. So if you think, I don't know if this youth knows what they're doing, withholding care is not a neutral option. It could be actively creating harm. So we just wanted to refer to the key source of the standard of care for transgender health, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health Standards. So if anyone has questions, you know exactly where to go for that source. And I know that was so much information to cover really quickly. And so you're going to have all of our contact information. We're happy to answer questions later. All right, Scott, take it away.
So Jen brought up having a care manager through the plan. So that's what I do. So I'm one of our care managers. I'm one of our licensed clinicians. And most of our care managers have experience in multiple levels of care. So working inpatient, outpatient, intensive outpatient, and really understanding our members' needs. So one of our members that was identified through our ED census, so we monitor our members' use of the emergency department. And just when there are red flags or certain visits such as suicidal ideation or attempts get flagged in our system, that's how we can identify some of our members. So this was a member that was identified multiple times and multiple times had declined working with us. She just wasn't in a point of her life where behavioral health was the #1 thing on her list. So we can also help with things like getting a PCP involved, getting a dentist, other parts of whole person care. So in working with this member, we figured that dental issues were the #1 issue coming up in her life, impacting her living situation, and really what she wanted to work on first, whereas our system had identified getting her involved in behavioral health services as first. So when we finally took the time to connect with the member and see what she wanted to work on, we were able to get her in. She met with a dental surgeon, had wisdom teeth and some other teeth taken out, and then was ready to engage with the PCP. She also engaged with the GI doctor, and then we got her in WISE. And so she was going to the ER. The data shows it was about 2.5 times a month on average. During some of those peak times, it was 2 times a week. And so once we got that put in place and we got WISE, PCP, dentist, we finally got her needs met, and she has not utilized the ED since. And I still keep in contact with her. We actually just sent her over a gift card for groceries and some groceries. So that was what she was mentioning was a hardship right now, and we were able to help meet that need and get those services over to her. And so she's still happy, healthy, engaged with us, and still has not gone to the emergency department for suicidal ideation in quite a long time. I don't know how many months exactly, but that's one of our success stories with one of our members. So. Oh, and she's also working full time, and yeah, everything. Things have turned around like a full 180 for her. So.
Some context, resources for providers. We're talking about the healthcare providers that we want to get trained up.
And then we did want to bring up too, just when looking at healthcare and the healthcare disparities, we always examine who's centered in our healthcare system. So traditionally, yes, white, cis, het men are typically centered in healthcare. And so in order to address those health disparities, we really have to look at who's being centered and how do we change that. So. Did it change? Oh, there we go. And then our principles for SOCI, so sexual orientation, gender identity expression, this was actually created with Jen. So our 5 principles that were, what? So we wanted to go through the 5 principles, the 5 SOGI positive principles that are followed. So the first one being felt safety. So members are going to share vulnerable, or patients are going to share vulnerable information. So creating an environment where somebody feels safe is really the #1 thing in order to increase connection, increase disclosure, increase access to care. The second one being assumptions versus awareness. So not making assumptions, asking questions such as, I know that many people who identify as this may do this. Tell me about how often you do that, versus making the assumption that just because this person may not be gender conforming, they identify a certain way or they engage in a specific behavior, which leads into that there are no singular experiences. So everybody is going to experience this world completely differently, and not making the assumption that there is a singular experience. Our next one is self-forgiveness and apology. So when making, the main one of this too is just when making an apology too, not to make it about yourself. So misgendering somebody, there may be an apology involved, but don't make it about yourself where it's, it's sorry and move on, and acknowledging that. So, and then also making space for members to identify. So a lot of our data collection work, or our work towards getting more accurate data, is to make space for members to identify with whatever sexuality, with whatever gender they identify as, and creating that so there's actual options on the data to make those selections. So, and then just seeing our members, as we brought up with our success story earlier, when you actually see your members and you work with them and you can see what needs are actually there and help them meet that and get the right healthcare, it can do wonders. Just as we brought up, it's also a form of suicide prevention. So really meeting our members where they're at and seeing what we can do can really help prevent any life-altering events or anything like that. So.
I'm looking at time, and so
oh gosh, did I talk too slow?
Be available later. We did want to highlight for healthcare providers who are not yet collecting this information, we made this available from the Fenway Institute, the LGBT Health Education Center. And then we did want to take just a moment to talk about trauma-informed care. I know the protocol touches on that. So this is information that we gave to providers. Really wanted to focus on some of these sort of things. So gendered terms versus less gendered terms, breast versus chest, pap smear versus cancer screening. If you have a trans man on your caseload who did go to a doctor and then gets, it's time for your annual women's exam postcard, that could be really traumatic. And so, we're trying to figure out how do we find providers across the state willing to do this work and become LGBTQ competent. And then how do we make sure they get information like this, that just simple changes in language can lead to less trauma for the youth that they're serving. And we had a lot of reaction to this information. Just different ways that providers should be talking, especially to youth who may have experienced trauma or sexual trauma. If anyone who was a medical provider said, I'm going to come into you now, it would not go well. And I don't have a very high trauma load. So just trying to make sure that providers are starting to get input and seek out training to really help them be better. So here is my contact information again, and you'll have mine and Scott's just to bring this to a close. I think we have 30 seconds for questions. I apologize. But we really appreciate this time, want to support you any way we can. Our brochure, the Trans Health Grid that we shared, and this deck and our SOGI principles will all be available from the CCYJ folks after the session today.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Jen. And Scott, thank you so much for your presentation. Are there any questions in the chat? Give folks a minute to type anything out.
It looks like we are waiting on our next speaker, so we might have a few extra minutes.
I can take longer on these questions. Scott and I are good at that. I do like the comment that love hearing the success stories. My experience working within the healthcare system was not LGBTQ plus affirming. Yeah, we will be posting, if you go to the Say It Out Loud website right now, you can actually see all the handouts we made available, including the gender unicorn that I know the vast majority have seen and love. And then, oh, Scott, there's a question for you if you have an answer for it. And then I saw Lori Jenkins enter the room and I got distracted. Sorry.
Speaker Jenkins has it right, but we can address this question.
Yeah, I'm curious with the question. So Ashley, can you share a little bit more? You were saying, yeah, inpatient right now is super difficult just because of, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic. So is the roadblock you're saying finding inpatient beds, or is it finding actual trans affirming care? I'll wait for her to type.
Yeah, I think it might be if you find the inpatient setting that can take your youth, how can you make sure that things like if they're on testosterone, how can they continue taking T while they're doing inpatient treatment? And are there settings that will agree to continue to do that? Or will they say, it has to do with genitals, I'm not interested, which we fully know that there are some providers who will react that way.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, and she's bringing up, yeah, private rooms are really tough too, or a lot of inpatient facilities too will have multiple people in rooms, and then the gendering of those rooms doesn't allow for an option outside the binary. But I haven't experienced any treatment related issues. You brought up, Jen, with adhering to medical plans that have been put in place, and certain providers may have, yes, as Ashley's bringing up, different viewpoints on hormones or hormone therapy, blockers, whatnot, and I haven't experienced much of that. And you have to remember the bubble I'm in of Washington State, and the bordering states too, where this is possibly an area where viewpoints might align more so with progressive viewpoints on that. So
I guess I would just add, just remember as caseworkers, as folks who are around these youth, they have healthcare somehow, and so you're not alone in doing this. Please remember to call care managers or the health plan. Please find other ways to help you get the support you need for that youth.
Thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you, Jen and Scott. We appreciate it so much. All right, so now it is now my pleasure to introduce Speaker of the House, Lori Jenkins. We are just so excited to have her here. She's a member of the LGBTQ plus community and a high-level leader, and so we thought better to have come make some remarks for this group. And so Speaker Jenkins made history on January 13th, 2020, when she became Washington State's first woman and first out lesbian Speaker of the House. She represents the 27th Legislative District in Pierce County. Speaker Jenkins started her career litigating child abuse and neglect cases for the State Attorney General's office. She then shifted her career toward public health, eventually serving as an Assistant Secretary of Health of the State Department of Health before taking the position of Director of Organizational Initiatives at the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department, where she continues to serve. She also has been active in advancing Washington's anti-discrimination laws both prior to and during her time in the House. Speaker Jenkins and her wife, Laura Wolf, live in Tacoma, where they raise their son. Please join me in welcoming Speaker Jenkins.
Thanks, Nicholas. And it is really wonderful to see how many people are in attendance with your first ever virtual conference. I think it was at last year's conference and spoke for a few minutes also. I see now that I'm not there. Maybe I'm doing better there. Sorry. I was like, where is my head in this? I don't know. You think after I just counted yesterday, my average is doing 13 Zoom meetings a day. So you'd think I'd be better at this, but always room to grow and learn. So I just want to start off by thanking all of you for convening on these particular issues. The Center for Children and Youth Justice has been incredible at really advancing the legislature's look at juvenile justice and child welfare and youth homelessness. And especially when we start doing the work that you're doing now, looking at intersex and other LGBTQ youth. we are, as happens in so many vulnerable populations, LGBTQ youth are quite overrepresented in all of these categories that I just talked about: juvenile justice issues, child welfare issues, and certainly when it comes to youth homelessness. And you all know that better than I ever could. I think the legislature, I hope you have found the legislature to have been a good partner with you on the work that you're doing, everything from the work that we're doing in the juvenile justice area, really trying to end status offenses and status incarceration. Also making sure that young people are actually kept in the juvenile justice system rather than moved into the adult system, where you just put young people on a pathway to nowhere. So we've done, I think, a lot of good work there. The Office of Youth Homelessness has been, actually, I've been doing work with them for the last couple of years, really trying to create some standards for organizations that are providing services to homeless LGBTQ youth. And I thought that's particularly important because here in Tacoma, where I live and work, we've had at least one organization that it's questionable that they're providing homeless services for LGBTQ youth, but it's really questionable about whether or not they are actually an affirming place to be sending young people to. And so that's work that we want to make sure we're doing. Likewise, we've done a lot of work in the healthcare arena. Some of you may have seen that in the last couple of weeks, the Trump administration has been trying to end healthcare services in all sorts of ways, especially for trans youth. Luckily, we saw this as a problem in Washington State a couple of years ago, and I started off with the bill, but Nicole Macri picked it up when I was elected speaker, and we actually have protections in our insurance world so that folks can actually get a broader based kind of health care. Now, I say all those things to you, and I came in just a couple minutes early, and it seemed like you all were talking about, right, good intentions don't always create the best world. And right, so I think with the legislature is just like everywhere else. We can sometimes think that our passing laws that are supportive immediately translates into good and appropriate service and service providers. And I think you all probably know better than anyone that laws are very helpful, but that we still have lots of work to do with individual people and systems that are within the law that either help or hurt. And I think that's an incredible, my guess is that all of you on the call are working in that realm. And I think this is, to me, this is kind of interesting. It's a little bit of a juxtaposition because, I also think you all are spending your time talking about systems and system change and systems that don't work. And that's something that the legislature is working really heavily on right now when it comes to racial justice, is that it's a very different thing for individuals to work to be anti-racist. But if all we have is individuals who become anti-racist and no system change to have systems that are anti-racist, we will continue to be unsuccessful. And I think that's part of the work of the legislature. But because you all are so focused on systems change, I think sometimes you don't, my guess is that sometimes you don't, hear often enough how important it is for LGBTQ youth, especially to have individuals in their lives who are supportive of them, and how that in the face of all kinds of oppressive systems, having one or two supportive individuals can change the life of LGBTQI people. And, I grew up in a small town. I grew up in a town of 500 people. My high school had 350 students in it, and the reason it was so big is because it was 5 towns the size of my hometown that combined to create one high school. You know, I was definitely convinced that I was the only person of my kind in high school, and that came with a lot of challenges, and you know, was also, you know, when I chose to go to a really large college, and that's been an interesting experience as I see other young people who choose colleges and things like that because they want to be known, they want to be able to know their faculty members and know other students, they want to have a smaller environment. And I think because I knew I was queer, I chose a gigantic school because I wanted nothing more than to be anonymous. I only realized that when I was much older, that I came from this town where everybody knew you, everybody knew everything about you, or it felt like they knew everything about you. And it felt very important to keep whatever secrets that you had very tight. And when I got to a college where no one recognized me, I didn't have to keep as many secrets. That said, though, I had teachers in high school who didn't really know what was going on with me, but who did things. I'll never forget, I had a teacher who in a, I don't know, it was a novels class or something, but he recommended 2 books to me. One of them was The Right Stuff, and one of them was Even Cowgirls Get the Blues. And Even Cowgirls Get the Blues has a lesbian theme to it. And he said when he recommended the book to me, Lori, it would probably be better if you didn't tell people I recommended these books to you, but I think that they might be helpful. You know, and I'm 55 years old. I remember my junior year of high school, and I remember Bob Faraday recommending that to me. And I remember realizing that he saw me, and he saw me in an okay way. So I guess I just want to say that I know you all are involved in systems change, but you all are also really involved in day-to-day engagement with young LGBTQI people, and that your ability to see them and for them to feel seen and heard and cared for is also part of system change in their world. So I'm happy to answer questions if you have time, but I don't want to put you behind on your schedule at all. But I just want to say thank you all for all the work that you do day in and day out, and especially in a tough environment like we're in right now. But it makes it even more important that you're out there for young people. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Speaker Jenkins. And we do have a few minutes, about 7 minutes, if there are questions. I mean, I could start off. So what do you see as sort of the next priority for the LGBTQ+ community in the legislature?
You know, I think that's a really good question, because we know now we've gotten to the point where we have a Supreme Court case that says that people can't be fired from their jobs. You know, so for anywhere in the country, and Washington has had that law for a long time, but you know, for many years, even though we had marriage equality, you know, it turns out that there are lots of people in the U.S. who could go get married and the next day go to their job and get fired for having gotten married. And that's not going to be the case anymore anywhere in the U.S., which is awesome. I tend to think that we're going to continue to look at healthcare issues, and that especially with regard to our transgender community, the healthcare issues are going to be really important in making sure that we are expanding healthcare to include very young people, young kids, all the way up to adults. And protecting healthcare services, I think, is going to be very important. Now, there's just, although Nicholas, I think right now it's a little bit hard because we're in the middle of such kind of economic and health devastation that rebuilding our economy and the state budget is going to be as important for the LGBTQI community as it is for every other community in Washington, because those are basic services related to housing, related to food, again, related to healthcare, related to education. Those services are all in some jeopardy because of our budget situation. So I think that we're really going to be spending a lot of time next session, almost all of our time, probably dealing with three big things. First, we'll be addressing issues that have been raised by the COVID pandemic that are not, that might not be budgetary. Second, we'll be addressing budgetary issues that are basically raised by the COVID pandemic. And the third will be the civil rights movement that we're in the middle of, and really focusing on Black Lives Matter. And that probably will relate a lot to reforming law enforcement and the way that law enforcement operates. And there's a whole plethora of things under that, in which I think that the queer community should really be thinking a lot about how to walk in an ally sort of way with our communities of color, and especially the Black community and the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, and a big part of that is the community who's potentially most at risk, and we've seen the most challenges for our Black trans women who are being murdered every single day in this country, and who are being prevented from having health care. And so we have a lot of connections that we really need to make sure that we understand and are being supportive.
Thank you. And it looks like Jen had a follow-up or a related question to the budget cuts. Jen, do you want to simply ask, I think, rather than me reading it?
Oh, sure. I think technically I'm not supposed to do that and go through our government relations person, but we were encouraged to think of this as a brave space. Yeah. So I think it dovetails really perfectly, but I mean, given, you know, my history, I know what we're going to hear is we don't have time for that this session, that meaning LGBTQ issues, you know, Black, Indigenous, people of color issues, or police reform or defunding. So what can we do as community members, as other folks, to help make sure that those issues stay front and center while everything is looking at, you know, cutting back programs?
Well, I mean, I think a couple of things, Jen. One is my comments on recognizing the intersectionality of what is happening with regard to the Black Lives Matter movement right now. And when I say that, one of the things that's really important to me is that there are very important things for the queer community. Right now, though, we are at a moment in time when we can make real improvements, especially for Black people. And we should really, my bias is we should really focus in on doing those, and be careful about trying to spread this out as a movement for everybody in a way. There are particularized challenges for Black people, and I just think that we really need to take advantage of the time that we're in, and really get behind those reforms, because those reforms will help queer people. They will help our Latinx community. They will help our API community. They will help Indigenous people. They won't solve every problem, but I just really feel like that's where we should put some of that energy. The other thing is just, again, the budget has the potential to be devastating for all those communities that I just mentioned. And so it's unlikely that we'll be able to make advancements on adding more money to very many things. I think, you know, right now I'm trying to carve out space to add more money for police accountability, and to have perhaps a civilian oversight board for to investigate deaths in police custody. But there's going to be a very limited opportunity for that. So paying attention to where the reductions are and trying to apply an equity lens to those reductions, because so often we don't pay enough attention to the fact that that communities who are historically discriminated against are disproportionately negatively affected by these reductions. So I think that equity lens is going to be important. And I actually, for the House of Representatives, I just convened a group that is working on identifying an equity lens for us to use in our policymaking work and in our budget development work for next session. And I'm trying really hard. It's funny, I work in public health in my other career. And so I'm trying really hard to explain to people what a learning environment is, as opposed to a perfectionistic environment, which is kind of the environment of the legislature. But the problem is, if you're really perfectionistic about something like an equity tool, you will never start using it. You will just try and make it perfect. Whereas I think that the best way to do it is to try and find some good tools that have been used before, for us to use them, and maybe only use them in some piloted ways, and then see how they work and learn, and then take our learnings and then do better and do better and do better. So it's kind of interesting. That's a very typical concept for people who work in public health like me. It is not a typical concept for political people or legislative people.
Well, thank you so much, Speaker Jenkins. Oh, do we?
I know, I was just going to say, look at that. It's 1:50 on the dot. I wasn't even paying attention.
So timely. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today, and for your leadership. I can speak for myself in saying that it's so refreshing to hear a leader from government sort of echo these sentiments. It's really inspiring, and thank you. We really appreciate it. And I also want to note for everybody who isn't aware that this was a very, very good year for children and youth in the legislature. I think there are going to be challenges with implementation due to budgets and that sort of thing, but in terms of the legislation actually passed, it was really good. And I just want to personally thank you, because one of the biggest pieces for us at the Center for Children and Justice was decriminalizing prostitution for minors, and I think that was extraordinarily important. These are victims of sex trafficking. They are not criminals. So thank you.
Thanks, Nicholas. I'll sign off, but I do want to let you know too that all the advancements that Nicholas is talking about, what I think is super cool is, if you look at who sponsored those bills, it's a wide diversity of our caucus members. This work is really held very firmly by so many members. So it's not just one or two people that are kind of pushing a rock uphill. It's a whole bunch of people that are working in collaboration to try to do a whole bunch of things at the same time, and we're having success doing them. So, and biggest part of the reason that we're having success is because you all are out there pushing us to do the right thing. So please don't stop doing that.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
All right, have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so we're going to move on to our last workshop, and I apologize to everyone. The trash truck always comes at the most inopportune time, so I'm speaking, so if you can hear that, I apologize. And I'd like to welcome Jonathan back to the virtual stage to present on, or lead a workshop on serving intersex young people. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Hey everyone, glad to be back to talk specifically more so about intersex education. Really looking forward to, I guess, educating and getting to learn with you all. So please feel free to drop questions as we go through this. I love answering questions, making sure I'm answering what people actually really want to know and not just filling a lot with just like back information. So please drop questions as I go through this, and bounce, I'll answer them, and we'll continue. And then at the end, I'll make sure I have time for a lot of questions. So there's that. So the title of this PowerPoint that I created is Intersex and the Invisible Movement. This is a movement that still, even to this day, doesn't get the platform that it should have. Even though it spans so many different identities, as well as so many different movements, where we're talking about bodily autonomy, we're talking about human rights violations, we're talking about so many consent is a huge thing, and we're just talking about how all of those play roles in the attaining and continuing to support intersex people or not supporting intersex people. So yeah, could you move to the next slide, please? So what is intersex? So a good baseline for people to understand is that Intersex, when we're talking specifically in the medical terms, means that people born with reproductive sexual anatomy or chromosome pattern that is outside of what the typical male and female boxes are. That can be, as we know it, is XY for male and XX for female. And then there's a plethora of different chromosomal configurations where you have XXY, you have X naught, then you have, there's two Ys sometimes. There are so many different variations of chromosomes. I'm not a geneticist, so I do not know all of them, but there is quite a bit in a very large range. So this can also be seen in hormones and secondary sex characteristics. So breast development, different placement of the urethra. We see this in of hair growth in different places, lack of breast development, lack of puberty symptoms. These are along the lines, a lot of the time related to intersex traits, but people don't talk about being intersex or what intersex is enough for people to really understand it, because we know by diagnosis, but so many people don't. So we just got to learn and educate. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about intersex people, I tend to have three big words that we all stay away from. Even though the term hermaphrodite is a term that intersex people use with each other, quite often it's pretty interesting. It's like a term of endearment between other intersex people. We talk about herms, we talk about like hermaphrodite mermaids, all types of stuff. We call each other all types of different things around hermaphrodites, but that's the word that what we call endosex people, non-intersex people, don't use, as it's a slur, and has been used as a slur in textbooks for a very, very long time. Disorders is another word that I stay away from, as well as many intersex activists stay away from, due to the fact of it medicalizing a body and saying that something is wrong with the body for being intersex. So people see DSD as a term for medically, some people say disorders of sex development, and then we've tried to change it to differences of sex development, but medical textbooks, they say both, or they alternate, or they'll just say disorders, because medical education doesn't have any standard at this point around intersex, other than the paragraph that they usually get. Also, when talking about normal, we don't like to say, what is a normal body, I guess? What do people think a normal body looks like? I guess we don't have a normal. Everyone's very different. Each person is unique. We have never tested everyone's chromosomes. We don't even know what everyone's possible chromosomes can be. And it's just such a vast spectrum that we don't know. So what is a normal? What does a normal body look like? What does quote unquote normal levels of something look like if you haven't tested a lot of people for something? And then there's still no normal. I believe I see there's questions. So.
Yeah, Jonathan, hi. I have one quick question. So what does the paragraph that medical professionals get actually say? Do you know?
From what I know, in an old textbook in 2018, as of the last time I looked at a medical textbook, it was just saying that intersex is a disorder of sex development. It has 35 traits in it. They listed the traits out, and then it just says, see this like syndrome, or it'll say, see like AIS or PAIS or congenital adrenal hyperplasia, like see that. And like we'll just lay it out and we'll say, yeah, that's that. And so it's not even like a detailed paragraph on intersex in general. It's just, here's all these traits that are associated with this term intersex, and you should go check out the traits, so then you'll just know what intersex is as a whole. And so it's just like a lack of education, and it's grossest form, to be honest, because it's just people choosing not to learn. because there's so many medical records and just so, like, people's stories out there as well. And just like, it's been now taken to state levels in multiple states on making sure that we're getting the end of non-consensual surgeries and stuff. And so now it's kind of turning into like a choice if people aren't learning about it, especially doctors and healthcare providers. It's a choice that they're not learning about this anymore, especially when we've been so loud that the United Nations has also talked about intersex human rights violations. So it's a big choice, but I don't know if I answered your question or not. Perfect. So next slide, please. There we go. So I am going to give you all a little bit of background specifically about my intersex story. Just, I think, kind of put everything in context, especially moving forward and talking more in depth about supporting intersex people and how we can support intersex people. So when I found out I was intersex when I was 18, which is pretty wild. It kind of flipped my whole world upside down really quick when I go to the doctor and they're like, yeah, you have a lot of breast tissue. And then they test my hormones and they're like, oh, your body doesn't pick up testosterone in the way it needs to. We don't know what that means. And then my medical records being spread across many different hospitals from being homeless growing up. We haven't been able to piece together everything until I turned about 19, when I got my medical records finally put together in a file and read through them and found out that I had a surgery when I was 6 that I didn't consent to, and it was determined a corrective surgery. It was like, doesn't make sense why I had a corrective surgery at the age of 6, didn't need one, but it was to close up a pseudo-vagina that I had ambiguous genitalia, and they wanted to make my genitalia look more masculine, so that I can go in the future and have a loving wife and continue to have children and move on in the normal cis heterosexual life that some people have. The usual. And so after learning about the surgery I had and moving through that, I got connected with Interact. Interact is a nonprofit that is made by and for intersex folks. They specifically handle law and policy, as well as housing an intersex youth program, the only one in the world currently. And so there are members from all over the world that are intersex that have most likely just met intersex youth for their first time when they join. And it has been amazing to learn and to start talking about my story and to start just meeting other intersex people, as well as strategizing on how to end surgeries, has been, I don't know, mind-blowing. And also so grateful because I've never been able to find people that I can connect with on such a deep level, because doctors tend to always tell intersex people that they're by themselves or that they're rare. They'll never find people like them. And so it is kind of fighting against stigmas that so many people don't even know exist, in the fact that medical doctors help aid in our isolation and help encourage an isolation, in a sense, to not tell people that you're intersex, to you're never going to meet intersex people, you're alone, you're rare, you're just like the only one that has this so unique thing, because you become their experiment. A lot of the time you become, ooh, I have an intersex patient. Have you ever had one of those? You become the talk of the office really quick. And I learned that going through my journey of collecting my medical records, and seeing new doctors and going to tests and paying $5,000 to get genetic testing was insane. Had a beautiful talk about that, but just seeing that, like, I, in a sense, became a wonder to them because of being intersex and because I was treated in the way that I was treated, having a surgery when I was 6, Me never being told that I had that surgery, I got my adenoids and tonsils taken out, and I was told that I was going in for a repair because something went wrong when I was really young. And I woke up, my only memory of waking up was waking up and feeling pain in my genital area and not my throat like it was a couple months prior, and just not knowing what happened. But obviously, once they brought in some ice cream and some video games, at that moment, it was just nothing. But then starting to go to therapy and read and hear other stories and just be like, oh, so that's what that moment was. That's what this is. And this is what this continues to be, because doctors are not educated on it. And people outside of the medical industrial complex also are not educated on it. So it's just intersex people fighting what we have, a system that we've given so much power to, and that's the medical industrial complex. Doctors have some of the most amount of power that a lot of people have, especially because it's tied to people's livelihoods. Yeah. And I think that a lot of us don't think about that and how much power a doctor has, and how also life-altering or possibly life-ending a doctor's decision could be on operating on a child, or just even not giving people the care that they deserve. And so it's sad that we're still at this point, that it's 2020 and that we still, not one state in the US has banned non-consensual surgeries. It's sad that that it just didn't pass in California, that there's one country, and that's Malta, which is the small island country in Europe, that has banned intersex surgeries. But a survey study just came out last year, I believe, about how these surgeries are still happening even though they passed laws up. And so learning how those loopholes are working over there and trying to implement them when we're making our bill and writing bills here is something very, very wild. But it all in the end resides on doctors and doctors' power to, decide a lot for a lot of people. Yeah. Oh,
Connie,
anyway.
there's an anonymous question that came into me. Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and ask it. And just so folks know, like, Jonathan and I worked out beforehand that, like, as questions come in, to ask. So please feel free as questions come up to ask, because this is how Jonathan does their thing. So I have a question. In their keynote speech earlier, Johnny mentioned that they hate medicalizing the term intersex. I'm wondering if they can expand upon that a bit, especially since I always thought the word intersex referred to the actual body and genitalia, whether internal or externally visible, or about chromosomal presentation. I guess I'm wondering how, as an ally, I can decenter medicalization of this identity, and if they can just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, no, of course. It's interesting, because I would say that this discourse is even happening inside the intersex community now, where we're talking about what demedicalizing our existence looks like, because our existence has been medicalized since colonization. So how do you demedicalize something that has always been medicalized, specifically in the US, I guess in the world, as colonization happened and the medical industrial complex was created? And so when all of your knowledge kind of is just attached to a diagnosis, it makes it so hard. And so we are trying to even work to reframe it in the way of thinking about how a lived experience is, separating the diagnoses from an intersex experience, a lived intersex experience. And that opens a lot of more doors, including bringing in a lot of more quote unquote diagnoses that aren't considered intersex. And that includes people with PCOS, That's one of the biggest questions. Everyone's like, are people with PCOS intersex? And like medically, doctors will say no, because it doesn't fit into, they don't know exactly how PCOS functions still. So they haven't even moved it into the intersex term. But as intersex activists and as the intersex community, most of us know that having PCOS, having your hormones vary so much, usually aligns with a large amount of intersex experiences. And so we would consider including PCOS as a intersex trait. And that's when you're demedicalizing the intersex identity. It opens up more to people, as well as kind of gives us a frame of an identity that isn't one that needs to have surgery attached to it, or even connotations of surgery attached to it. It's just a lived experience of people that have variations in their chromosomes, their hormones, their secondary sex characteristics, their genitalia, all of that stuff. Kind of in a bigger way of inclusion, I would say, because not everyone has access to medical. On top of that, not everyone has access to medical, not everybody has even found out their diagnosis yet. I know intersex people that are just now getting told that their diagnosis that they've had for the past 15 years is wrong. And they're back to the drawing board on care, because intersex is such a complex world. It's just such a complex identity, as well as medically it's complex for them to try and figure out and parse out technically like which diagnoses you have, instead of worrying about how can we care, how is your body going to react to this, how can we make sure that you're getting the best care and feeling like your best self, instead of how can we fix this, how are we going to fix you, how are we going to make this work. And so it just shows how the switch to a sociocultural understanding of intersex identity needs to happen. But in discourse, it's just back and forth, continuous. Some people love the medicalized side of it, because they don't want to be attached to the LGBTQ community. And so they attach themselves to the medicalized side of it because it gives them, quote unquote, more validation in the fact that they are. Mostly this sentiment comes from cis white women in the intersex movement, where they're like, I am not part of the LGBTQ community. It just happened to be intersex cis woman. And everyone's like, being intersex doesn't mean that you're queer or trans. Like, we understand that there are other reasons why we're grouped in. And so it's super interesting to see the need. Even talking about it now, I'm just like thinking about, oh my goodness, I can't wait to get off this call and go and talk to all these intersex activists and be like, y'all, we really have to make the move over. We have to just push for this move. So I just think things will change as we get education as well as recognition out in the difference between medicalizing intersex and, I guess you could say, talking about it in the sociocultural aspect of intersex, and how if we're centering our care instead of our trauma, what that changes as a whole. And that's what we've been trying to do specifically about bills and with laws, is centering care and making sure that people can give consent and know what's happening with their bodies and understand kind of how their bodies react to things, or what things are actually going to do to your body, instead of getting a surgery when they're a baby or when someone's 4 years old and then they grow up and the surgeries are irreversible. They can't go back. And then it just leads down this very dark path usually. And then parents are, sad, remorseful, regretful of doing everything. And then the intersex person's usually gets pretty upset with their parent at some point. There's a time where everyone's like really upset, and hopefully there's resolution, but not all the time. But that also comes with doctors persuading and using their power and authority to make parents agree to surgery for youth. So it's so many layers. It's just mind-blowing, and I am excited to see what a move like that would look like for us in general. And like maybe that move happening sooner could help people to understand intersex better, because I think the medical terms scare a lot of people. They go, oh, like when I say congenital adrenal hypoplasia, people are like, what'd you just say? I don't know what that is. And so then they immediately cut it off and they're like, I don't have that. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't matter. And so moving into kind of being able to, I think, synthesize our identities in a sociocultural way is going to be beneficial, not only for our community, but for, I think, the community at large. But I don't know. I think I answered that question. I hope so.
You
just
did.
let me know.
Do you want to move on to the next slide? We have a couple more questions, but I think you were also going to give some more basics before we address those. Does that sound?
Yeah, go for the next slide and we'll pop in to a question. Wow. Look, as I've just talked about this, this slide just talks about intersex and identity. We're talking about how being intersex does not immediately mean that you are at all LGBTQIA, 2P+, like all of these things. That doesn't immediately mean that you are. I mean, in my theory, I believe that intersex is a very queer identity, but that is not everyone's truth. And I do not believe that to be everyone's truth, but I believe intersex to be a very queer identity in its being. But that's controversial in the intersex world. So we're going to continue on. Some intersex people identify as cisgender and some do not. Some people will identify their sex as intersex. And some people will identify as just a cis intersex male or a cis intersex female. And so there's just a range, just like any other identity. There's a spectrum within each of how people identify. Intersex is just the weird one that kind of like, we're used to thinking about gender and sexuality, but I think sex, biological sex and sex on the bottom, that's like where we talk about intersex, is like the base before you even get to sexuality and before you even get to gender. You really just in there, your foundation, what doctors would call your like foundational biology, you're like whatever, like what is that, like grounded, like in, stuck, like never changing, is your biological sex or whatever. But it's a spectrum. They love to make assumptions. Anyways, a lot of people think, I don't know how or why, but people think that they can like look at somebody and just tell that they're intersex, and I don't know how. I went to Creating Change a few years ago, and someone like swore by the fact that they could like look at someone and say that they're intersex or not. And I was just like, what? Just like, how? Like, what is your indicators? Like, what? How do you know? And they just like were like, there's just a certain look and feeling. And I was like, okay. And they tried and it just didn't work. And I was like, yeah, because you can't figure out if someone's intersex by just looking at them. That just doesn't happen. Same with trans folks. You can't tell someone's trans by just looking at someone. You can make an assumption that you shouldn't make of someone's trans or not by looking at them, but you can't tell how someone identifies just by looking at them.
Johnny, there's a question that kind of goes to this. Yeah. Wesley asks, given the less medicalized definition, how do trans people choose to live in bodies that fall outside the standard sex binary, fit or not fit into intersex communities and experiences? I've always heard that trans people aren't a part of the intersex community, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think that this is kind of going back to what you say, but maybe more explicitly.
Oh yeah, that's so interesting because of the parallels that trans and intersex people, I think, have and like run on. I think there's so much overlap. And then there's also old school intersex people who are like medical definition or nothing. Like, there is no discourse. We're not having anything. Like, this is intersex and there's nothing more to it. And in their time in the old schools, there was a time where it still happens to this day where a lot of trans people will come to our intersex like support conferences where it's just like only intersex people go, and they'll say that they're intersex and make up a story about being intersex, like fabricate this like complex medical story that like doesn't make sense. Because I think that people don't understand that there's also like intersex people who happen to be doctors. Like, there's quite a few that go and will hear someone, and it's like usually because they're looking for community. And so some people, you know, old school intersex folks don't necessarily handle that with grace. But then the older and the newer generation of people who have like started to shift to understand that there is two definitions of intersex, a medicalized one and a social, like cultural definition, have been a little bit better about it, because what so many people say is trans people come in and act as imposters a lot of the time in intersex movements and intersex spaces. And that's just what has happened historically. So intersex and trans movements bump heads a lot. And it's super interesting because the intersex movement has historically always been supportive of the trans movement, but the trans movement has never been supportive of the intersex movement, like vocally. And so there's just like a lot of what I would say rivalry between the two, which there shouldn't be, but there is. And so I think that we should be able to come together because we run, like, our experiences run so heavily parallel to each other, where we're talking about hormones. Hormones, people who've had surgery, or sometimes when you haven't had surgery, have to be on hormones. I have to be on hormones for the rest of my life due to my surgery. So I know I have a lot of friends that also do. And so we all talk about hormones, and we're all taking hormones, and we're all doing this thing. We're trying to get access to hormones and stuff. And it's interesting because now even in Washington State, it's easier for a trans person to get access to hormones than an intersex person in the state of Washington, because you have to consistently prove that you're intersex medically. And we know that system of running people in circles a lot. Oh no, we're gonna have to test you again. That's too old. That document's too old. We need to test you again. And then you find a new doctor and they go, ooh, you're intersex. Okay, because most doctors aren't educated on intersex. I still haven't met one in Washington State that is intersex educated and like super intersex friendly. So that's pretty wild, because I go and teach at UW at the medical school and lecture there as well. So it's super interesting that even their professors aren't intersex educated, especially when they're like teaching an LGBTQ friendly like medical class, like LGBTQ in the medical field. And they just like not intersex educated. And so it's just so interesting how it is easier for a trans person to get hormones in the state of Washington than an intersex person. And that's just telling, I guess, of how this movement is right now. We hear intersex voices most of the time just as intersex voices. We don't hear intersex and trans voices together still. Even now when we're talking about what's going on in the world now, intersex community is talking about medical trauma, medical state violence, and how state violence is affecting Black lives as well, and has always affected Black lives. And that's how the medical industrial complex was built, on Black women. And so, especially gynecology specifically was built on the backs of Black women and Black slaves, to be exact. And so that's a lot of our discourse on the intersex side. But then when I'm in like talking to trans folks and I bring up intersex stuff, they're like, oh yeah, we have to end surgery. And like, that's where it stops. Like, that's where the conversation stops. Like, people can't even like tell me like a semi-definition of intersex. Like, they don't know what that is. They just regurgitate end intersex surgery. And I'm like, but there's more to it than that. There's more that we need to do in the curriculum. There's more that we need to do in our basic knowledge and our resources and our paperwork that we have at all of our organizations, with the male and female sex boxes. So it's just, I think, pretty shocking even to talk about and like think about on my side about how similar the trans movement and the intersex movement is, especially for bodily autonomy. We're both fighting for bodily autonomy in the end of the day. And like, for some reason, we can't see eye to eye and like come together. And that's due to a lack of education on both sides about the other community. But now that we have a lot of queer intersex people that are like moving into leadership positions and like activism and like leading these conversations, a lot is starting to change. But it's hard because then we talk internationally, and you can't talk about LGBTQ stuff internationally in many of the countries where intersex people are on the ground fighting for laws. They have to separate themselves from LGBTQ in some countries in Africa specifically, just to make sure that people do not believe intersex and LGBTQ is like together, and believe that intersex people are homosexual, and, you know, I guess conflating those two big. So it's such a complex topic to think about internationally and then in the US as well. But yeah, wow. I wish we could just all be friends, but that's just not real at this point. We gotta get to learning. Yeah. But yeah, is there any more? I feel like there's more questions.
There's a lot of gratitude for this conversation. I think you're bringing up some pretty great nuances. A lot of folks are pretty shocked by the fact that this is a really good point, that it's harder for intersex folks to get access. And Wesley also thanks you for the comment and says the trans community absolutely needs to be better allies to intersex people. That history of invading spaces explains a lot of what I've heard from activists. So thank you for clarifying that nuance. There is another question, but I think go ahead and continue on your presentation and we can ask that one later.
Yeah, sounds good. Could you advance to the next slide for me?
Absolutely.
All right, so if we haven't talked about it enough already, we're going to talk a little bit more about some surgeries, just to let people see kind of how wild people get to talk, like to lead people into doing surgeries. Like, doctors say some insane things, and then they talk about there's no bad results from these. There's a lot of bad results from them. So many of the procedures that we talk about in the intersex movement are unnecessary because most of them are cosmetic. They're for cosmetic purposes. They're not emergency surgeries to help with urination or anything like that most of the time. There are those times where that needs to be done, and we're not, like, as intersex activists, as an intersex community, we're not against those surgeries. We're not at all against surgeries that need to happen for life-saving surgeries or emergency things. But we're very much so against just cosmetic surgeries that don't need to happen, especially when it's on babies and children that are way below the consenting age and can't give consent for themselves because of the impacts of the surgery and how lifelong these effects are going to last. And just, there's a lot behind surgeries that I just am like, I don't understand. I don't get why people still do them, but you know, systems are built and it takes time to change. But there's one thing that we talk a lot about with surgery, and that's consent. Consent is something that some doctors and a lot of parents still believe that like parental consent like should be held above like the consent of like a child, especially when they're younger. And I don't think that to be true at all, because I think children are autonomous beings and deserve bodily autonomy as well. And as parents, I very much so believe people should be helping to guide their child instead of doing things to their child that can harm them in the future. Without education in general. So we are fighting currently for legislation to move surgery and like push surgery back until an age of consent. That just depends on the state. Some people have been throwing ballparks around, like waiting until the patient is 13, waiting until 16, just depending on what that looks like for someone to get surgery that is cosmetic, that is not required anything. But that doesn't happen a lot of the time because a lot of doctors coerce a lot of parents into doing surgeries. These surgeries range from clitorectomies, which is I guess in plain words, the chopping off of an enlarged clitoris, which leads to lack of sensation, sometimes or most of the time, can lead to a lot of problems around sexual health, sexual wellness later on in life. And that is just, it's insane that that's happening when people are 4 months old, 6 months old, 6 years old, 8 years old, 12, all these ages. It's pretty insane that these are still happening and that doctors are like, yeah, this is just how they're going to have a normal family, or like, so they don't get bullied or whatever. There is so many excuses to do clitorectomies specifically because it doesn't look ladylike. And so the idea of like what the perfect vagina looks like is still a big thing in the medical world. And so it's just very scary that it's even just on that one surgery. It's just continuously happening. We have surgeries where people are removing gonads for people with AIS. AIS is the androgen insensitivity syndrome. We call it AIS most of the time because that's the medical term for it, as well as we don't like saying syndrome, so we always just stick with saying AIS. I personally have PAIS, which is partial androgen insensitivity syndrome, and that's where my body can't uptake testosterone in the way, and I also had a gonadectomy where they removed my gonads, and that's why I'm stuck on hormones for the rest of my life. There's a lot of stories of people with AIS that have had their gonads removed and are stuck on hormones for the rest of their life. But to even get them removed, doctors have lied to patients saying, oh, your kid's going to get like cancer if they don't take this out. It's going to harm them. It's like doing this, or they got this hernia because of this. And so a lot of the time, her exploratory surgeries and like hernia like fixes are ways of people being able to go in and remove quote unquote foreign objects when they know it's a gonad that produces and provides the hormones that we need. So it's just wild at how complex and how vast surgeries are. There are people who have surgery when they're really young, and when you get a vaginoplasty when you're a baby, sometimes it doesn't grow with you. So people have been having to get repeat surgeries their whole lives. And it's like because surgery usually sometimes doesn't grow with you, especially when it's in the genital region before puberty. I think it's just so wild to me that like people still don't recognize how terrible this is, because it's just so, I think it's just blatant. In my eyes, it's just so blatant. I'm like, y'all are operating on a baby for what reason? Like, you're operating on a baby because of cosmetics? Like, what does that matter at this point at all? Like, what? And so I think it's just something that people just lack an education on. And we've been trying to start doing a lot more education, but without, I guess, having other movements uplift intersex voices as well as media in the same way that we're uplifting trans voices. We have yet to be heard fully. We've been heard by various groups, but I don't think we've been heard by like society as a whole yet. But I hope that that changes, because we need to get these bans going. We got to stop operating on babies.
Yeah, that's actually leads to a question that one of our participants asked, and it relates to the graphic on this slide.
Yeah.
And how do you pronounce that? Is that
Oh, fallometer.
Fallometer?
Yeah.
Is the fallometer what the child is changed to? And that was like a question. So I don't know if you want to explain that one a little bit more.
Yeah. So on the screen, the people's faces, everyone's faces was in the way of the image. I didn't even see it was on there. But the fallometer is actually a tool that doctors were using to determine if there was a boy or a girl, or if there was a need for surgery for a really long time. So in the blue area, anything above an inch of either penile or clitoral tissue means a boy. And then anything below, what is that, 3/8, I believe, 3/8 of an inch is girl. And then anything in between that means you most likely needed to do surgery because it was abnormal or not right. And so the fallometer was a tool for many doctors to use, and I think actually still use when it comes to assessing genitalia. I just haven't read any medical books recently in the past year, but who knows? I should probably do some research on that. But it's just insane that that's there. There's a very famous surgeon that was quoted talking about surgeries and the fact that when we look at genitalia on kids, they say it's easier to build a hole than to build a pole. And so most of the times, surgeries that'll happen if the clitoris is too large or if nothing typically looks enough male, they will just go ahead and do a whole vaginoplasty and change the entire setting of genitals because they believe it not to fit in the normal range or what it would look like to not be bullied. And you won't live a normal life if you do not have that done. And so a lot of the time, when you're in a vulnerable state as a parent and you're at the doctor and this person that you look up with so much authority, you're like, oh, wow. And the doctor goes, yeah, so your kid's going to be bullied unless they have surgery, or your kid has cancer or can have cancer from not doing the surgery, but we can easily get this done while they're young and they'll be perfectly healthy. Parents who either don't understand medical stuff most likely are going to be like, yeah, whatever you need to do to save my kid, like to make sure that my child's going to be perfect, because everyone wants a perfect child. I don't know what a perfect child looks like or acts like, but people want a perfect child, and doctors can very much so sell that dream to people. But yeah, that's a little bit about the fallometer and kind of like, I guess, the context around it and surgery more so. Gosh, yeah. Ugh. Surgery, crazy. I just don't understand. I don't get why or how. People haven't got on board yet, but we need to go ahead and get some laws passed. We need support from everybody to do it, but we're going to do it in the future. I know it. I have a feeling, especially with all this revolution going on. We're going to get a bill up next year. Let's hope, but you can move to the next slide. All right, so here are some recent milestones that I believe happened in 2017. These are the most recent that I've been able to find that are quote unquote big name milestones. We've had a lot of milestones, but the first one was MC, who's a 12-year-old who got awarded the $440,000 for a surgery that they had when they were young. And that's one of the first cases to ever be awarded in a court of law money for having an unnecessary surgery. And that was I think that just happened in 2016. And that's wild. That's the first successful case. that we know, that I know of, that happened to quote unquote reconcile the traumatic, just like lifetime stress now of having the surgery. But you know, it is what it is. It's good. We glad we won something. We're getting precedents here very slowly, but people are slow to learn because it's such a medicalized topic that people don't want to step around it because of people are like, I'm not a doctor, I don't know. But I'm like, this is about humans, this is about human rights. We're past the talk just about doctors, don't be scared. Another big milestone was the UN announcing that surgery is a violation of human rights. So United Nations put out a long report and in meeting stated that intersex surgeries, non-necessary cosmetic surgeries are actually human rights violations. And we still, countries around the world and the US still have yet to recognize that the UN has said this. We know the UN is not a lot of things at this moment, but it is important that leaders from many nations have signed on to something, but we don't see any legislation in many countries following suit with that. But it is amazing to be able to say the United Nations has recognized that these human rights violations are happening. It's a big, big, wonderful thing. Another great thing that I encourage people to really look into is the Human Rights Watch report on intersex. It is like, they have like books. It's like a little booklet. It's very, I think it's like 128 page report on intersex medical injustice and experiences and how we're going to refocus intersex care standards. I highly recommend it. You can find that on the Human Rights Watch website as well as Interact's website. And that is a great tool to really kind of dig in to learn more about medical professionals talking about the surgery from a more medical standpoint, as well as people's experiences and stories of having surgeries afterwards. It's a really great resource. Another thing that happened was the intersex people of color protest. So it was led by intersex people of color, specifically Pidgeot Pagonis, SIFA, Intersex Justice Project, and Interact came together to protest in Chicago at Lurie's Children's, a hospital in Chicago, who is actively still doing the surgeries and lists the surgeries being done on their website, that intersex surgeries are very clearly being done there. And it was a beautiful time. It was right when our intersex conference was. So there was about 150 intersex people in one area, which doesn't happen. Like, that is unheard of. That's wild. That is like a dream. And that's wild to say because we're so common. Intersex is what, 1 in 2,000, 1.7%. That, like, the same number of people that was, I believe, that live in Russia. The entirety of Russia, the population of Russia is the same number of intersex people there are in the world. And I think it's wild to just say, oh, 150 of us got together and it was so good, you know, so wild. And that's just such a low number and it just should be better. But with education, more people will feel good to come out and it's just going to be so good. We've gained a lot more people in our community in the past 2 years. And people feeling okay to come out. There's like directors that are intersex that have been coming out and just like media CEOs and stuff. And we're like, what? Where have you been? Where have you been this whole time? We've been here. But it's really cool to see. And with education, you know, we'll get there. And I hope at some point I could say, oh my gosh, 1,000 intersex people got together. And that was a sight to see. That was unlike anything else.
So speaking of milestones, there was a question that was asked a little bit back, and I just feel like this is an appropriate place to ask it. Katie comments, you know, you are a survivor of a lot of really challenging circumstances. What helped bring you to the place you are at now? What were the most helpful things that people said/did?
Ooh, now that is a really good question because most of the time I didn't tell anybody anything. I used to be a really private, like I think I grew, when I was homeless, I kind of like groomed myself into understanding that like I shouldn't say anything. And so throughout high school and stuff like that, like a lot of people didn't even know I was homeless. Like people didn't even know I was homeless until I wrote an article that came out in college, and my high school saw it, and they were like, oh my gosh. And I was like, yeah, just doing my thing at college, just living it up. But I think being affirming of intersex very specifically has been so important to me, especially like seeing intersex included in like paperwork has been weirdly really affirming. Like just seeing that little box with intersex next to it, I'm like, ooh, people thought of us. People really saw us for a second. And just like including the I when we're talking about LGBTQ, that is something that we get cut out of all the time, every day. Every time someone says LGBTQ, intersex people are once again erased. Even though it's super interesting, in many countries, LGBTI is the acronym. So it's interesting that in the US we've erased the I and put in the Q, but that's due to the medical industrial complex and the power that they have in the US. So how wild. But I think a lot of things affirming around intersex folks and not talking about normal bodies, I think is a really big thing that has been affirming to me in passing. Like, I don't come out and be like, I'm intersex to like every person that I just like walk past or have a conversation with. But having people like, when we're talking about bodies or we're talking about medical stuff or whatever, addressing that intersex people are around has been so beneficial. And like people, challenging the idea of what a normal body looks like in everyday conversation has been wonderful. Just to be like, yeah, and that there's like micro penises are like an intersex trait, and like it's actually really rude to say that someone has a tiny dick. Like, that's not good. That's just not at all good, and it's actually really hurtful to intersex folks. And I don't think a lot of people know that, but seeing people jump out and correct people has been the most, I think, uplifting. And getting connected with Interact really, I think, launched me into everything from my activism to just my understanding of myself and my peers and the work that we need to really be doing to bring intersex people in, as well as to let them know that we're there and we're supportive of intersex folks, because it's never said enough. And yeah, getting connected with Interact, I think everyday things have always been so affirming to me. It's never been, nothing outright. I can't even think of something that's like outrightly said that I'm like, oh, thank you, because I'm just like, let me see you talk about ending intersex surgery. Like, I want to see you make a post. I want to see you do something that like isn't prompted by me being there or me being around you. I like seeing that stuff. I think that is the most affirming. And I've heard from a lot of intersex people, seeing a family member or a friend start talking about intersex out of nowhere. We're like, ooh, it's not Intersex Awareness Day. Wow, y'all actually noticed us on a different day. Cool. Oh, we could talk to you about something. Or having friends be like, I know you have like friends, especially that know your story. I have friends that know my story, of course, and offer to go to the doctors with me a lot. I'm coming up on a knee surgery on the 30th that I'm terrified of because of medical trauma and medical violence. But having my friends be like, yeah, we'll sit there and wait for you. We'll be there. It's just like, so I don't know. It's wonderful to be able to like be seen in a way of like, people are listening, people see us, not only as a community, but just as like humans that deserve rights in general. Yeah, I just challenge everyone to post about intersex folks, learn about intersex folks, post some about intersex people. Just so people know that you're learning about it. I don't know, I think people learn about so much in behind the closed doors that like we don't talk about it enough, but learning about intersex people and the voices that aren't uplifted very out and proud about it, I think it's going to help change our dialogue and be affirming to a lot of intersex people, more intersex people than you know. You probably worked with an intersex person, walked past an intersex person, you know, all types of stuff. Just intersex people are everywhere, been everywhere. But most of the time it's the stigma of people not thinking that they can't find each other. So I think if we're out and proud and talking about intersex and educating about intersex and like making sure that we are like very specifically talking about including intersex, it'll be wonderful. And I think people will be able to see that that's affirming. Because for me, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see. It makes me smile a lot.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. We had a comment and then we have another question. So Kimber says, it's wild that so many folks in the medical field argue against trans folks getting life-affirming surgery, but are silently performing surgery on children to, quote, make their life better, AKA make them fit into the cishet box. So wild, agree.
Yeah.
And then Jen asks, do you know if there are healthcare providers in Washington state that have a good track record with intersex patients, not forcing surgery, experience with the conditions and community, etc.?
So I will very sadly say none. Interact has also done an extensive survey about this. And even looking specifically at surveying and asking and talking with doctors that are LGBTQ, like specialized and friendly, we still haven't found anyone who's intersex competent and friendly, because they will treat intersex people just like they treat trans folks. But that's just not how that works. There's usually a lot of extra things around getting treatment and care as intersex people. I specifically, like getting my hormones and stuff, I have to go do DEXA scans, so bone scans, because my bone density is at risk when I'm not on my hormones. It's a side effect of PAIS. And so it's very important that I go get a DEXA scan once a year, and I make sure I'm monitoring my hormone levels, and making sure I'm checking for breast cancer and other stuff like that. It's super important because I have to take such high levels of hormones. And I think people don't think about these things when they're not intersex competent. So to my knowledge, there is not really any. Even like Planned Parenthood has been making beautiful strides, wonderful, wonderful strides. And I've had a wonderful time educating my Planned Parenthood provider. Great people, we have great times in there, you know, chatting it up. But just like even seeing Planned Parenthood do such good in like moving forward with being able to like prescribe hormones and stuff to trans folks, but then just like, I'm like, dang, we still haven't got intersex people included in this. Like, not even just like intersex is on the application and stuff, and like it is visible, but then I'm like, but we have to match our paperwork too. We also have to train our staff to be on point with that. And so I'm excited to see the growth and to see what's next when people start to educate more so on intersex very specifically, and not on trans with the hint of intersex in there because we'll put it on our paperwork. So I think, yeah, not to my knowledge, it's really sad to say, but there are movements and people are learning, but there's not much you can, I guess there's not necessarily really an institute either, like a medical institute that you can like go to just about intersex stuff. We usually have at our intersex support group conference, it's also a CME, I guess that's what it's called, like continuing medical education thing. So we have therapists and doctors and surgeons and stuff come, which is wildly traumatic, I will say. It should be two separate events, but they decide to, for some reason, the organization decides to hold up the intersex people with the surgeons. It's really a mess. But we have surgeons and therapists and psychiatrists and all types of folks, medical providers that come and learn about intersex from our intersex doctors as well as from intersex like voices. That's usually what happens. And I think that's the only one that I know of being like more of a large scale CME in the country. So.
And there's a follow-up question is like, does telemedicine to experts elsewhere help? Like, if a young intersex person like needs that, like, does telemedicine help like bridge that gap, or is that?
So what we have is what Interact has specifically has put together is a list of like intersex competent doctors. But I personally have never called a doctor outside of the state of Washington or anything to get help. I just talk to the intersex doctors that I personally know because I'm like, what's going on? I don't know what's happening with me. And they're like, we'll be cut and dry with you. Like, we already know what you have. Like, we'll let you know what's going on. And they're very helpful. But yeah, I haven't had any experience with telemedicine being any more helpful with connecting folks because of location and such, and distance, because the most intersex competent doctors that I know of, there is one in California who's big in the intersex movement, and is an intersex person. And then there's a couple on the East Coast who happen to be like an orthopedic surgeon and something else, like a whole family. Their daughter is intersex and they grew up in the intersex community, but they're intersex competent doctors as well. And they lead kind of like the intersex research and the world of intersex research, of trying to educate more doctors. But most of them are on the East Coast. So I don't know how that would work, even with insurance stuff, because I don't understand insurance enough for out-of-state providers and all of that, and like counsel. But there's not like even a intersex, like a super detailed intersex friendly directory, like a lot of trans friendly doctors nowadays. Now we have a lot of trans friendly like archive of what doctors are trans friendly you can go to. That hasn't happened with intersex on any type of major scale. Yeah.
I just also want to point out that there was a comment. Jen just said, heck, we can help with the insurance research. Hopefully that's coming down the line.
That would be wonderful. Wonderful. We need all the help to navigate these wild insurance worlds, because it doesn't make any sense to any intersex people, other than doctors half the time.
Yeah. Do you want me to advance the next slide?
Yes, please. All right, so a little bit about the future. So we're continuing to fight and advocate for intersex to be destigmatized, as well as banning non-consensual surgeries. While that's still just the movement, like, we're not asking for a lot, to be honest. And I think it's kind of just like telling of how a bill that was going to protect intersex kids went up in California and was voted against by some commission or something. But you want to know why it got voted against is because the medical, the California's like medical association paid like $500,000 to some council or some project the day before. And so the two people ended up voting down that worked on their project or whatever on the bill, so it didn't get to move forward. It's just interesting at how far doctors will go to kind of not only cover up what's happening, but continuously do it, because it's the way that they make their money. That's how they charge the insurance companies for all them surgeries. Especially because they can get away with it by saying it's medically necessary, because there's not even researchers really have touched intersex as like research topics enough. And that's wild. There's no studies saying that intersex people getting these surgeries are actually helpful in any way, shape, or form. Now we have studies saying that it's really harmful and people still aren't passing them. And that's because it's attached to money in the end of the day. A lot for doctors, and doctors worrying about parents' wants and consent for their children. But we'll see how that goes when we ramp up, hopefully, for the next year. in legislation to get something passed. Another thing that's happening is a lot of intersex films, documentaries, and other stuff are on the way. Pony Boy is a short film that I think is actually available on YouTube now. It's done by my friend River Gallo. River is another intersex person. They not only directed it, but they were also in the film itself, acted in the film, I believe, as the main character, in a narrative film about intersex experience, which is the first of its kind to be narrative. And so it's really cool. Stephen Fry was one of the executive producers. I don't even know where I know Stephen Fry from, but it's just Stephen Fry. He was one of the executive producers, as well as some other big folks have got on board to start pushing that out. We have Pigeon Pagonis, who is wonderful and has been putting together a couple of films. Pidge has films on talking about their medical records, phone calls, like recorded phone calls about their parents and doctors talking. It's a beautiful, beautiful short film that I can make sure I send Lily all of the links and stuff, and maybe we can get all those out to everybody at some point. But yeah, there's so much beautiful art that's coming out of the intersex movement in solidarity, not only with Black Lives Matter, but also illuminating how tangled Black Lives Matter and our fight for bodily autonomy is, and how we've been there and are fighting for Black lives, as well as, of course, there are Black intersex people. It's all connected. As I said in my keynote earlier, we're all connected in one way or another. So it's really wonderful, but I really, really push and urge people to look up some art and some films and some short films on YouTube around intersex advocacy, intersex stories. We have the movie Intersection, which I believe is on Amazon Prime. Hulu has my favorite intersex film I've ever seen is Ariana. It's an Italian film on Hulu. Highly recommended to check it out. It's wonderful. It's beautiful also. It's just beautifully shot. It's like in the Italian countryside. Gorgeous, but it's a coming of age story of an intersex girl who comes into understanding that she's intersex, and that her parents hide it because her dad is a doctor, and has his friend being her doctor, so they hide everything from her, and alter all the medical records and everything because it's a mess. So you just have to check it out. It's a great movie. I don't want to give away everything. I'll sit and talk about that movie forever. Wonderful. I think one of the most accurate portrayals that I've seen in a narrative film like that. It was really cool, really great.
There's a question that kind of came in that is a little bit related to that, I guess. And this person says, not exactly sure how to ask, but is there a tension between intersex activists and advocates who are out and wanting to make changes and destigmatizations being intersex, and intersex folks who may want to remain passing and not be out or proud? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I got it. Yeah, there is a lot of tension, I will say, between out intersex people and intersex people in like the quote unquote closet. There are intersex people that like will come to we'll have at a lot of conferences, we do like an intersex caucus, or at least we try to. So intersex activists usually will host a caucus at a conference, and there will be people who are intersex that come to the caucus space and like just don't want to be out, and like will like change their name, will go by a different name, and it's just, I think it's wild. I don't know. I mean, everyone's entitled to their thing, but it's wild that like people will come into a space where everyone's like sharing their truths and like they share their truth, but under like a completely different name and just everything, because they're scared that they'll lose their job because they're intersex, because of like the conflation between LGBTQ and intersex. so there's a lot of tension between the two of those. There's even, oh gosh, CAH is congenital adrenal hyperplasia. It usually leads to enlarged clitorises in what people like to, like, I guess, typical female-bodied folks who have CAH have enlarged clitorises. And there's an organization called the CARES Foundation that advocates for clitorectomies on children because they believe and like have, you know, brainwashed these kids and these families to think that like without that surgery, they would never have been a real woman, and just like all of this wild, wild stuff. And like doctors support CARES because of course they're doing surgeries and making their money. So CARES has like sponsorships from like wild big companies and all of this, and they promote surgery, and but they're all intersex. All the CAH patients are intersex, and so there's a lot of butting heads between the like CARES Foundation intersex folks and non-CARES Foundation intersex folks because they're operating on their children, but then have testimony and stuff of people who had their surgery when they were young saying, I'm so happy my mom did it for me, like, and had me do it when I was young. So like I was perfectly normal when I grew up, and just like stuff like that. So it's super wild that there's these like two vastly different just like perceptions happening at the same time in the movement. Like the CARES Foundation sells what they call mermaid pants, and it's just a mermaid tail that goes on your younger kid after they have surgery to keep their legs together, so that they don't tear any stitches or anything. And they actively sell those and make sure that babies get them for when they're having surgery. So it's wild at how one side of things is just like for the surgeries and like so about them, and we see them pop up at hearings. If anyone watches anything around the intersex bill in California, I believe it's SB 10 something, or SB 120 or 106, I don't remember. But there's a lot of people from CARES Foundation. CARES Foundation pays to fly out families to different states to fight the bills, and to fight everything. So it's very interesting, and doctors love them. So they have the doctors on their side a lot of the time. But yeah, there are two very different worlds, and there's a lot of tension, a lot of discourse, a lot of fighting between closeted intersex people or people who don't want to be associated with intersex, as in many of the CAH folks are, and intersex people who are out, or advocates or activists.
So we have, thanks for that. And also we have about 8 minutes left to the presentation today. And I'm curious, do you want us to keep advancing the slides, or do you want us to just hone in on questions that folks have?
Let's do some questions. I think I want to hear what people want to know, and I want to make sure I can get to them. And if not, please feel free, everyone, to reach out to me personally afterwards.
So
and ask
now
questions.
is the time. If you have these burning questions, please, please, please ask them. And always remember, you can message me privately, and I will read your question anonymously. But Wesley asks, I teach sex ed, and I'm often teaching people about genitals for the first time. Do you have easy to understand language about intersex?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we talk about specifically around teaching sex ed, we talk about not saying that like this is a normal girl's body and this is a normal boy's body, and with those the signage of like what genitalia look like on those very gendered bodies, we kind of tell people to be like, well, this is a quote unquote like typical female body. We try to like move into words that like avoid like possibly like making distance between intersex students and the rest of the students. But I don't know if there's like actual language that we've like as a community kind of like put forward for sex educators, especially at a young age. We just make sure that people are, it kind of goes hand in hand with intersex education to with trans education and their bodies as well, and like how there is a spectrum of bodies, and there is a spectrum of genitalia. There's one end of the spectrum and another end of the spectrum, and then there's so much in between. I think is like the best. I'm pretty positive that Interact, one of the resources that I will make sure gets sent out to everybody, has a lot of brochures, like a massive amount of brochures that are done by intersex folks and intersex youth that have written them, talking about what we would like our teachers to know, what we would like our doctors to know, our like friends, our parents. And then there's another website that's called forintersex.org. It's run by Interact, and it has every resource that you're gonna want that Interact even has, is on their on the forintersex.org website, where it talks about educating yourself, educating your community, talking to legislators, tell doctors, and it has like scripts and just like PowerPoints and just so much information for anybody to use and really be able to start educating other people on intersex stuff as well. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like interested if there is, I'm pretty positive there's a teacher's one. I know that there's a teacher's one because we just put that out about 6 months ago. But yeah, there's on forintersex.org, there's going to be a lot of resources that go specifically and give you some more concrete words, because I was like, I don't know any off the top of my head about specific language, because it's a hard place to navigate, I think, when we're talking about educating younger folks, especially making sure that we are making sense to people, and quote unquote staying age appropriate for folks. And I think it has to be a continuous education around intersex, and straying away from this is the boy's body, this is the girl's body. And sometimes, you know, what people say in trans education is sometimes there are boys that have vaginas and sometimes there are girls that have penises, and that still cuts out intersex people. So involving and making sure that we're talking about this is some people have this, some people have that, and there's this whole in between, and kind of, I think spending a little time talking about that in between would be very beneficial, but I don't know any concrete things.
It doesn't look like we have other questions. There are a few comments. Molly says, I teach sex ed too, and like showing a variety of body examples that include intersex representation. I think you've said this, representation matters. Doing that. Are there any other questions that folks have before we graciously thank Jonathan for their time today?
This is Jen. I have a question, but I don't know if I can type it fast enough. It just came up. Johnny, thank you so much. I was just wondering, I mentioned the gender unicorn earlier and was wondering if you actually find that a helpful tool, or if there are any problems with it we should be aware of if we're using that to help talk appropriately about the intersex individuals.
Okay, wow, I just like Googled it really quick because I was like, the gender unicorn, oh my goodness, this is something that I should like know. I've just been through the genderbread person, like 3 different versions of the genderbread person from my last dive in, and that's pretty wild. From even just what I'm saying, like even just having the sex assigned at birth as intersex there, like shows so much. It just shows that it even exists. And like, this is probably one of the best visual representations that I've seen, because it just includes intersex and it doesn't give like these wild long definitions and confuses people on like what intersex is, but in sex assigned at birth, perfect, right there. I mean, other and intersex, the grouping those together is a little weird to me, because that's othering intersex people already, just basic wise. But yeah, if they just separated and made intersex purple and then made other a different thing, beautiful. That's the only correction I would have to the thing, but it looks good to me.
Yeah, Kimber's right. Yeah, it was created by the Trans Student Education Resource Center, and we presented it, and someone was like, are you going to talk about the problematic aspects? And I realized, like, I don't know what those are, so I need to do some more learning. So that's a great one to know and work on. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
And of course, the language sex assigned at birth is very complicated for like the trans community as well. So just, you know, a reminder, again, that tension, right?
Yeah.
And trying to find that space and place. But thanks for bringing up the importance of like pointing out how do you hold space when there is that nuance, and you make a really good point of like just specifically name intersex folks. Like, so I think that's a really good point. Great. There's a lot of thank yous, a lot of gratitude, and I'm not seeing any more questions. So with that, I think we are good to move on with the end of our day. And thank you so much, Jonathan, for your amazing presentation. You taught us so much. Everybody can say congrats and do the little react things. Because it's truly amazing presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan, so much. You know, I imagine it can't come without some cost, sharing the personal story. And I just want you to know that, at least for me, I can speak for myself personally, that your story like inspired me to do better. And so there is a great benefit there. And so thank you for sharing that. In addition to all the information, in addition to holding us accountable, I mean, I will say we need to take a look at our curriculum and the training that we do and make some changes. And it's going to be based on what you've just shared with us. We didn't know what we didn't know, and we need to improve. So I really appreciate that, truly. So now we are nearing the end of the day, and you have stuck with us throughout this very long Zoom meeting, but I'm going to implore you to just stick around for a few more minutes. We have 2 more things that we're going to do. We're going to do a quick evaluation, and we're just going to do this simply through a poll question. And so everyone's going to be able to see the results, and so we'll see how that is. And Lily has that up now, and then we're going to do a quick closing activity that I think is important to do as a group. So there are 6 evaluation and assessment questions, and I think they're pretty self-explanatory why we're asking this. Essentially asking the main components of the presentation, you know, why, right, is it going to help you in your work? And then the remaining 2 questions are on whether we've done our job, right, to really focus on Indigenous, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, LGBT youth. And then the final activity, once we're through this, will be sort of our own action planning. And so once you finish the poll, you can start with that. If you've been in my trainings, you've seen this, you've probably seen it, you know, 20 times if you've been in multiple trainings of mine, but I think it's always really important to have a takeaway from these trainings. And so as you finish up the poll, I'd like you to think about, you know, what is your what is one observation you have from today? This is an objective thing, something you observed, something that stood out, something that was new for you. Then moving on from that is your so what. What conclusion can you draw from your what, right? What does it mean to you? Why is it important? Why do you think it stood out so much? And then your now what? And so what action are you going to take as a result of your so what, right? And then thinking about what can you do without significant additional resources or authority? What can you do? You need extra authority. And I'd really encourage you, and I think this would be really nice if we could all share our now what's in the chat box, so that we're leaving today with, you know, action and empowered to take action on behalf of LGBTQ plus youth, and especially Black, Indigenous, and LGBTQ youth of color.
And just a reminder to folks, we have about 2/3 of folks who responded to the poll. So please respond to the poll. This is helpful for us as we go forward and plan things like this.
We have a question, Lily, from how do I respond? Is it up? I'm not.
Sarah, do you specifically mean the poll or the questions that are at the end? Oh, the poll. So the poll should be shared with everybody right now on their screens. If you are currently on your cell phone, that might look differently. So if you're unable to see the poll, it might be a limitation of technology. I just also want to echo too, if you're unable to respond to the poll, please feel free to individually reach out to me via email with your comments or or what you learned from today. Also happy to receive that. Nicholas, we have about 85% of folks. Do you want me to wait or do you want me to share?
Let's give 20 seconds. So we'll do.
Okay. Great.
And I just shared my now what. And so thank you, Rowan, for going next. All right, I think we could probably close the poll.
So some of the now what's that folks are saying: incorporated update definitions and personal understanding of both two-spirit identities and intersex experiences. Additionally, I'll bring these new concepts to future clients, colleagues, and interactions. I feel much more confident speaking on these topics now and know where to go to get more information. Someone also says add more intersex representation to our sex ed curriculum. Snaps to that.
And we can also take this time to address any remaining questions or whatnot. I think it's probably okay to talk if you want, as we have stuff coming through the chat box. And we'll keep on for maybe a few more minutes to let folks think. We got a registration link, so make sure you copy that before it gets too buried. This is for the Washington State Indigenous Children, Youth, and Families Summit.
Amazing. We'll make sure that that goes up in a follow-up email.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tina, for that.
Which Lily just reminds me that we are going to be sending out a follow-up email with links to important resources like the protocol, our resource maps, the handouts from today.
Sorry, you can all hear my clicky click.
All right, well, it seems like we are, well, we'll let maybe another minute or so. Again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us and for joining us on Zoom. For me, at least personally, Zoom is a little bit difficult, and it's very difficult to hang in there this long. The benefit is that we get to be, have more participation and invite more participants. And so I think that is a great thing, but I think I speak on behalf of our entire team when we say that we really look forward to seeing you all in person again. And Lily, did you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, there are folks who are also sharing some now what, so I'll go ahead and share some of that too, just with everybody. Now what, add some of these resources and videos to our foster parent education orientation to help foster families better understand to support all youth. An immediate thing I can do is share what I learned today with people closest to me. I'm even more confident to continue advocacy at my agency around intersex representation, affirming imagery, and changes to our internal form trainings, etc. Update research and evaluation materials. Now what? I can speak to medical professionals I know about intersex folks, especially all you social workers. I know you deal with a lot of medical professionals. You absolutely can. Now what? Share resources with my coworkers that can be beneficial to youth we serve. Make sure I mention intersex people and trauma-informed language training I'm giving to our AHCC staff in the coming weeks and educate myself better. I plan on making sure to really try and teach language to staff in my area and really in life as well. I think it's important to make sure everyone understands that all people in the LGBTQ plus community do not identify the same, and it's okay to ask and talk about them to make sure we can understand their needs and wants best. Absolutely snaps to that. Provide more education to families and where to go for resources and support. Use correct language in supporting youth and the importance of encouraging placements to use correct language as well. Absolutely. Yeah, and just for me, I am so grateful. I learned so much from both of you today, as well as our other lightning round speakers, and from all of you who have attended today. Beautiful insights, much learning, and much gratitude on my end. Yeah, that's my closing thought.
So we'll keep this up if folks are still sharing with us. But yeah, again, this concludes our day, and we're just so grateful for you to join us. And thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Lily, do you want to go to the next slide and show it just in case I forgot that that has our contact information and stuff?
Yeah, there's a contact.
I think most people know us, but
yeah. I want to make sure before we turn everything off that I confirm real quick with John Dieter that we don't lose the chat.
Oh, right.
And the polling results.
Sure.
John Dieter, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Let me open up chat here.
You're gonna see all the private messages in the chat too.
It'll be really
yeah, I don't, if I do it, I didn't do any private messages, so I could just download a clean copy of it.
Oh, great.
Are you able to also download the poll?
Maybe. I can screenshot that. It says share results. What happens if you do that?
It just shares it to full screen.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I don't.
I'm just going to take pictures of it.
Yeah, that's probably for the best, because it would take probably 5 or 6 screenshots in order to get the whole thing.
Yeah, I